Drifting through darkness, with no way back, you stand at the edge of the world, the shore behind you, fading in the salty mist, and ahead, only water. Nothing but open black ocean. You hear the waves slap gently at the dock. You feel the breeze damp and heavy, like breath from something ancient. You look up, there are no stars tonight, no moon. Just you, a vessel older than memory, and the quiet creak of wood as you step aboard. The lanterns swing lazily above you as the ship begins to move. You're not steering. You're not even sure who is. But you're moving now out into the deep, out where the sea forgets your name. The ocean doesn't care that you were careful, that you checked the forecasts and your compass, that you packed enough food for months. It doesn't care that you told someone when you'd be back. The sea has its own rules, and sometimes, only sometimes, it keeps you. You probably won't survive this, but that's okay. Not tonight, because some ships leave port and never arrive. Some are found years later floating like empty coffins, meals still warm on tables, lifeboats missing, radios tuned to emergency frequencies no one ever heard. And some are never seen again. No debris, no bodies, just silence. Gone. These stories aren't fiction. They're not sailors' tall tales whispered over rum and storm lanterns. They're real, documented, investigated, sometimes even photographed before the sea took the evidence back. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. We begin with a ship that set sail in 1906 from San Francisco. It had 108 souls on board. By the time rescuers arrived, it had been torn apart on the rocks of Vancouver Island. And even now, a century later, sailors still report seeing it ghostly and broken, drifting just offshore. So take a deep breath. The air smells of salt and rust. A gull cries overhead, but it sounds distant, like it's already forgotten you. You grip the railing as the waves pick up and the fog thickens. You're no longer on the dock. You're no longer in control. The voyage has begun. The ship rocks beneath your feet gently at first, like it's deciding whether to trust you. The wood groans softly, as if remembering something painful. Ahead, through the mist, jagged cliffs emerge dark and sharp like broken teeth. You're drifting toward a place sailors have feared for generations. A stretch of Pacific coast they call the graveyard. And somewhere among those rocks, the first story waits for you, half sunk, half remembered, but still whispering through the waves. This is the story of the SS Valencia. She wasn't glamorous, not the biggest, fastest, or finest ship of her day. Built in 1882, the Valencia was a workhorse, a steamship designed for coastal routes along the rugged edges of the West. She ferried passengers and freight between San Francisco, Seattle, and the Alaskan frontier, chugging through fog and cold past forests so dense they swallowed sound. She'd done this for years without complaint, until of course she didn't. It was January 1906, the air sharp with winter. The Valencia departed San Francisco with 108 souls aboard men, women, children, all bundled in scarves and good intentions. The weather was bad from the start. Fog rolled in thick and wet. Winds howled. And the ship veered off course. By midnight on January 22nd, the Valencia was blind. Navigation was impossible. The crew squinted through the murk, trying to spot the coast, unaware that they were already dangerously close. Just before dawn, it happened. A sudden jolt. A scream of metal against stone. The Valencia had struck a reef. Water rushed in below. The hull was breached, and the sea was hungry. Panic followed, immediate electric. Lifeboats were lowered, but the surf was unforgiving. Waves like fists battered the wooden cradles, flipping them, splintering them, dragging people under before they had a chance to scream. Some boats made it away from the wreck, only to vanish in the gray miles beyond. Others disappeared entirely. You can almost hear the voices, can't you, over the wind, over the creak of the ship. Mothers clutching children, officers shouting orders, sailors tying lifelines around trembling hands. And high above the chaos, survivors clung to the rigging, watching the cold ocean take piece after piece of their ship and their companions. Rescuers didn't arrive until the next day. By then, most of the Valencia was gone. Only 37 people survived. The rest were either swallowed whole by the Pacific or smashed against the cliffs. Some of their bodies would wash ashore, later wrapped in ruined life vests. Others would never be found. And here's where the sea refuses to let the story die. Years passed, decades, and then came the sightings. Fishermen near Pachena Point told of a ship dark skeletal appearing out of the fog. Its masts splintered, its decks empty. It matched the shape and size of the Valencia. They swore they could see figures on board, silent silhouettes, standing motionless at the railings. One group even claimed to see a lifeboat float past them, paint-chipped, empty, drifting south toward nowhere. Strangest of all, in 1910, 4 years after the sinking, a lifeboat from the Valencia was found. Upright, intact, nestled in a sea cave miles from the wreck site. It looked untouched by time, almost freshly painted. On the bow, in faded white letters, Valencia. Even decades later, locals along that coast reported skeletons washing ashore, tangled in old ropes, life jackets still strapped across their bony shoulders. No one could explain how. The sea had moved on, but something hadn't. Some say the Valencia never left that reef, that she still clings to it, invisible, unless the fog is just right. That on stormy nights, you can hear her bell tolling softly, mournfully, warning of rocks that are no longer there. Of course, historians try to explain it. The wreck was never fully salvaged, they say. Pieces drifted, memories twisted, survivors talked, newspapers exaggerated. Maybe. But there's something about the Valencia that makes even the skeptics shiver. Maybe it's because the Valencia doesn't just tell a story of death. It tells a story of waiting, of passengers frozen in terror, watching the cliffs knowing help would not come in time, of a ship that cracked and split but somehow refused to sink all at once, of ghosts who didn't vanish quietly but stayed behind, anchored to the graveyard of the Pacific. Historians still debate whether the sightings were real or imagined, whether that lifeboat was part of the original wreck or washed in from elsewhere. But one thing's certain, something lingers near that reef, something that doesn't forget, and now the fog thickens again. The cliffs vanish behind you. The sea rocks your vessel like it's pleased. The story is done, but the feeling it leaves, cold, damp, unfinished, clings to you like salt on skin. You glance back toward the mist, half expecting to see a silhouette, a single mast perhaps, or the curve of a lifeboat drifting too slowly to be natural. But there's nothing. The Valencia has gone quiet again. She'll wait. She always does. The water calms around you now, though that doesn't feel like a comfort. There's a stillness to it, a kind of too quiet hush, that unsettles more than it soothes. You lean against the railing, gaze trailing out to the waves. Somewhere in the distance, something moves. Not quickly, just a drift, a speck, a hull. No lights, no sails, no sound. And as it comes closer, you see it's a fishing boat, clean intact, oddly serene. But no one's steering. No one's aboard. Welcome to the story of the High Aim 6, the ghost ship that drifted through the 21st century like a riddle with no answer. It was late 2002 when the High Aim 6 departed from the port of Liuqiu, Taiwan. A sturdy little fishing trawler, nothing fancy. Just 10 men, a seasoned captain, and a mission as ordinary as they come. Sail the Pacific, catch some fish, bring them home. You know, simple. Routine, except it didn't come home. Weeks passed. No updates, no check-ins. And while missed reports from deep-sea fishing vessels aren't always cause for alarm, something didn't sit right. When January 2003 arrived and the High Aim 6 was officially overdue, the Taiwanese Coast Guard raised an alert, but still nothing, just open water, open. Then 1,000 miles away from where it was expected, the High Aim 6 turned up. It was spotted on January 8th, drifting aimlessly off the coast of Western Australia by an air patrol. The crew aboard the surveillance aircraft saw something that didn't quite add up, a vessel bobbing gently over calm water. No radio contact, no signs of distress, but also no people. From above, the ship looked perfectly healthy. No fire damage, no hull breach, no oil slick, just empty. So they sent a boarding team. Now here's where it gets eerie, really eerie. The ship's engines still working. The fuel tanks full. The radar operational. Supplies in the galley were untouched. The crew's personal belongings, clothes, shoes, wallets, still in their places. In the cold storage, a fresh catch of fish lay neatly packed in ice, like someone had just stepped away mid-shift to grab a cup of tea. But there was no logbook. No distress signal had ever been sent. And all 10 crew members were simply gone. One fishing line still trailed in the water behind the boat, as if a rod had slipped out of someone's hands. As if they'd all just walked off the deck into the sea. You ever get that itch in the back of your neck? Like someone standing behind you, just out of view? That's what investigators must have felt, walking those eerily still decks, hearing nothing but the quiet hum of machinery and the ocean slapping against steel. And then came the strange twist. A few weeks later, authorities managed to track down one of the missing crewmen. An Indonesian sailor named Supriyanto had surfaced back in his home country, and when questioned, he offered only this: there had been a mutiny. The rest of the crew, he claimed, killed the captain and abandoned the ship. That's it. That's all he said. No motive. No further names. No explanation of where they'd gone, or how he'd escaped, or why the ship was left in such pristine condition. And just like that, he vanished again, slipping back into the obscurity of the islands, never to be formally charged or questioned further. Investigators were left blinking in the sunlight, standing on the deck of a ghost ship, with no blood, no struggle, no evidence of violence, and the only clue being a confession that felt more like a distraction. A mutiny, maybe. It wouldn't be the first time a captain pushed too hard and his crew pushed back harder. But where were the lifeboats? Why didn't they take supplies? And why leave the ship completely undamaged, drifting perfectly with a full catch of fish still chilling below deck? Some suggested that perhaps the crew had been involved in illegal fishing or smuggling operations. That when things went south, perhaps a conflict, perhaps an accident, they decided to vanish, leaving the boat behind like a shed skin. Others leaned toward something darker, a chemical leak, a sudden gas buildup, a freak accident that disoriented the crew and led them into the sea one by one. But there were no toxic residues found, no clues, just a ship and silence. And here's the strange thing. Despite everything, the High Aim 6 didn't become famous. No documentaries, no Netflix dramatizations, just a handful of archived news reports and maritime incident files that even most sailors haven't heard of. But that might be the scariest part, because the High Aim 6 wasn't pulled into a storm or dashed against rocks. It didn't explode or sink or burn. It just kept going, just floated, as if it had a mind of its own, as if it didn't care whether it had a crew or not. Eventually, the ship was towed back to Taiwan and examined from bow to stern. They found no new evidence, no new theories, just 10 names listed as missing. And then the investigation was quietly closed. Somewhere, perhaps, Suprianto still lives. And perhaps he remembers something he didn't say. Or maybe the sea took the memory from him the way it takes everything else. And now, the ghost of the High Aim 6 sails through your thoughts too. A perfectly functional ship with no one at the helm. A warm engine, a cold catch, and the kind of silence that settles in your bones. You glance overboard. Just waves now. Just the quiet, endless hush of the ocean smoothing everything over. But for a moment you thought you saw something. A white speck. A vessel. Drifting. Empty. You shake your head and move on. There are more ships to meet. The wind shifts again, colder now, like it's picked something up along the way. The air tastes different. Metallic. Faintly acrid. You lean against the railing, and the sky seems to press down a little harder. Ahead, the water stretches wide and smooth. No land, no light, just distance. But under that glassy surface, danger bubbles quietly. You're heading into a stretch of sea known for swallowing entire vessels whole. And one of them, it was carrying a cargo so volatile it should have been feared from the moment it left the dock. This is the story of the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a ship with a dangerous mission, a questionable design, and a disappearance so total even the ocean refused to leave a clue. She started life as a war machine. Built in 1944 as a T2 tanker, the Marine Sulphur Queen was originally designed to carry oil to fuel the Allied war effort. Big, tough, practical, everything a wartime cargo ship needed to be. But peace, as always, brings changes, and someone had the bright idea to retrofit her, to take that solid old oil tanker and re-engineer her into something riskier. Molten sulfur, that's what she was tasked with transporting, about 15,000 tons of it, heated to a blistering 275 degrees Fahrenheit and sloshing inside enormous insulated tanks. Liquid fire, basically. The conversion was cost-efficient but controversial. Sulfur, when heated, is not only volatile, it's corrosive, especially to steel. And while the engineers signed off on it, some sailors whispered doubts. They said the hull flexed too much, that it creaked in ways it shouldn't, that the Queen was old-tired and maybe not as seaworthy as she pretended to be. Still, she sailed. On February the 2nd, 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen departed from Beaumont, Texas, en route to Norfolk, Virginia. The weather wasn't great, cloudy, turbulent, but nothing a seasoned crew couldn't handle. There were 39 men aboard. Some were veterans of the sea. All of them expected to be home within the week. They never made it. 3 days into the journey, the ship sent out a routine radio transmission near Key West, Florida. Everything was normal. Just a standard position report. No distress, no trouble. Nothing to suggest that those would be the last words ever heard from the Marine Sulphur Queen. And then silence. When the ship failed to arrive in Norfolk, the Coast Guard launched a massive search. Over 350,000 square miles of ocean were scanned by air and sea, helicopters, patrol boats, sonar, every trick in the book. And what did they find? Almost nothing. A few life jackets, a piece of an oil slick, and some debris too generic to confirm as hers. But no hull, no cargo, no bodies, not even a distress flare. The Marine Sulphur Queen had vanished, as if plucked from the sea by something with very quiet hands. That didn't sit well with the families. Many of them believed the ship had never been fit to sail in the first place, that the sulfur conversion had weakened her hull, that cracks had formed maybe invisible until one day somewhere in the Straits of Florida, everything gave way. One moment, a tanker. The next, a twisted furnace of steel and molten cargo plunging into the deep. The official report kind of agreed. In 1964, the Coast Guard released their findings. They cited structural failure due to poor maintenance and a design not suited for carrying molten sulfur. It was the bureaucratic version of a shrug, but there were gaps, questions they couldn't or wouldn't answer. Why was there no distress signal? If it had been a slow breach, surely someone would have reached for the radio. If it had exploded, wouldn't there be more wreckage? And why were the sulfur tanks never recovered? 15,000 tons of bright yellow cargo gone. You'd think it would leave a mark. And then, of course, the Bermuda Triangle rears its head. The Marine Sulphur Queen disappeared along the southern edge of that infamous zone, where aircraft blip off radar and compasses spin like they're possessed. Some believe she fell victim to that same mysterious force that magnetic anomalies or a dimensional rift pulled her under. Others suggest something even stranger, that the sulfur itself ignited in a spontaneous, almost supernatural event. That fire consumed her from the inside out so fast and so hot that nothing was left to float. The ocean, it seems, has a taste for the dramatic, but the most haunting detail of all, the voices. In the days after the Queen vanished, some ham radio operators in Florida claimed to pick up faint broken transmissions, men shouting over crackling static cut off mid-sentence. One voice, barely audible, kept repeating the same word. Fire! 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 Was it a hoax, misheard signals, or a ghostly echo carried through the ionosphere? We'll never know. What we do know is that the Marine Sulphur Queen is still out there somewhere, probably in pieces, probably deep, but the sea won't tell you where. And the sulfur, it's long gone, dissolved, settled, waiting, like bones buried in a place no one dares to dig. You pass over her now, unknowingly. Your ship creaks. The air grows warmer. You catch the faintest smell, like burned matches. A little sweet, a little wrong. Maybe it's your imagination, maybe not. You look back once more, scanning the waves for a flicker of yellow, for a splash of metal, for the ghost of a tanker whose only warning was a routine check-in and a scream no one could answer. But the water holds its secret. It always does. You've been drifting for hours now. Or maybe it's been days. Time slips strangely out here where the sky blurs with the water and the horizon hides its secrets under a blanket of slow-moving clouds. A seagull cries somewhere, but you see no birds. Just empty sky. Just open sea. And then from the corner of your eye, you spot something pale bobbing in the waves. A small vessel, White, quiet, lonely. It's not sinking. It's not even damaged. But it's moving slowly without aim or direction. As you draw closer, you see the name stenciled on the side, CAS 2. This is the ghost yacht of Australia. A boat so perfectly preserved, it looked like it had been paused mid-voyage, mid-lunch, mid-thought. But its crew was gone. All three of them. No bodies, no blood, no explanation. The CAS 2 set sail on April 15th, 2007, from Airlie Beach, Queensland. It was a modest 32-foot catamaran owned by a group of three friends, Derek Batten, 56, the skipper, and Peter and James Tunstad, two brothers in their 60s. They were experienced sailors, not professionals, but well-versed in maritime safety. This wasn't some daredevil expedition. It was supposed to be a relaxing cruise along the northeastern coast of Australia. A retirement adventure. They left in good spirits. Calm weather, clear skies, a stocked galley, and a decent forecast. Their route would take them past the Great Barrier Reef toward Townsville, then eventually across to the west coast. But they never arrived. 3 days later, on April 18th, a surveillance aircraft flying near the reef spotted the CAS 2. It was drifting aimlessly about 88 nautical miles from Townsville. The sails were flapping in the wind, unfurling and snapping with no one at the helm. It was immediately clear something was wrong. When the rescue team boarded the yacht, they found a scene straight out of a maritime horror story, but without the blood. The engine was still running. The GPS and navigation systems were working. The table was set for lunch plates, silverware, even a cup of coffee still warm. A laptop sat open on the table. 3 life jackets were neatly stowed. All personal belongings were untouched. But the boat was empty. There were no signs of violence. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. No signs of a struggle-forced entry or storm damage. Just emptiness. 3 men had vanished from a perfectly functional yacht, leaving everything behind as if they'd simply stepped off for a swim and forgot to come back. Authorities launched an extensive search across land, air, and sea. But no bodies were ever found. No distress call had been sent. The emergency beacon had never been activated. So, what happened? One theory, simple tragic, suggests that one of the men fell overboard while fishing and the others dove in after him. The yacht, with its engine still running and no one at the wheel, drifted out of reach while all 3 men struggled in the current. It's a haunting idea. Quiet, plausible, but unsettling. Because here's the thing. The CAS 2 was a catamaran, not a speedboat. It wouldn't have taken off quickly. The ocean that day was calm. The men were experienced. There were life jackets. And yet, nothing. Another theory points to the yacht's sail, which was found slightly damaged. Investigators wondered if it had caught suddenly in a gust of wind, striking one of the men and knocking him into the water. The others may have panicked and tried to help. Again, believable, but odd. Because sailors don't abandon ship without protocol. They don't leave a vessel like that running untouched, unprepared. Some speculate a sudden medical emergency, heart attack, stroke, heat exhaustion caused disorientation or panic. Perhaps one fell and the others followed into the water one by one. That's the most logical explanation, the least spooky, the least ghost ship. But then there are the stranger theories. Some point to foul play. A stranger boarding unnoticed. A 4th man slipping in and out, leaving no trace. But there's no evidence of a struggle. No DNA. No missing dinghy. And the boat was in open sea. No nearby islands. no hiding places. Others because this is the ocean after all point to more unusual causes. A rogue wave, a whirlpool, some bizarre atmospheric anomaly that pulled the crew overboard in seconds. And then, of course, there's the quiet theory that haunts every story like this, that maybe they were taken, not by pirates, not by a murderer, but by something older, something vast, something in the sea. Because this wasn't a weathered old freighter, battered and sinking. It wasn't a storm-tossed vessel found after years of drifting. This was a pristine, functioning yacht. The engine hummed. The lights worked. Even the food was warm. It's like the sea came knocking and the crew just answered, and the name Kaz, Genten, the do that only makes it stranger. In Swahili, Kaz roughly translates to work or task. A coincidence maybe, but in this story, even the coincidences feel too deliberate. To this day, the Kaz 2 remains one of Australia's most baffling maritime mysteries. No wreckage, no life rafts, no bodies, just a vessel that felt more like a stage set than a real place. A ghost ship, not because it looked haunted, but because it felt paused, like time had stopped, like the sea had reached up, taken its 3 men, and left everything else in place. You stare at the yacht now as it drifts beside you, pale and clean against the darkening waves. You half expect someone to walk out onto the deck, shielding their eyes from the sun. But no one does. Just the wind, the water, the faint slap of a sail. You keep moving your own vessel, pressing onward into the deep. But you leave a part of yourself behind with the Kaz Nanu Tmu, wondering what they saw in those last moments, what they heard, what they felt, and what, if anything, is still out there waiting. The sea around you feels heavier now, like it's holding its breath. The air is dense with salt and memory. You glance out at the waves, but the horizon offers no comfort, just a gray smear in every direction. Another shape begins to rise from the water ahead, not fast, not loud, but sure. A weathered schooner, mast splintered sails gone slouched slightly to one side, as though even the ship has grown weary from its long silence. Its name, once painted proudly on the hull, is barely visible now. Carol A. Deering. This is one of America's most enduring ghost ship legends. A schooner that came home, but without its crew. Not a single soul aboard. No captain, no cook, not even a pet. Just an empty vessel drifting under full sail, as if guided by ghosts. The Carol A. Deering was a 5-masted schooner, big, bold, built in 1919, at the height of the American maritime boom. She was designed to haul cargo across great distances, and by 1920, she was doing just that, tasked with delivering coal from Virginia to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her original captain, William Merritt, was experienced, but fell ill just before departure. He and his son, who served as first mate, disembarked in Delaware. The company quickly replaced them with a new captain, W.B. Wormel, a man with a long beard, a hard hand, and according to some reports, a bit of a chip on his shoulder. That's where things began to shift. From the start, there were whispers of tension aboard the Deering. Reports later surfaced that Wormel and his new first mate, Charles McClellan, didn't see eye to eye. Some say the first mate was loud and insubordinate. Others suggest Wormel was no better rigid suspicious, perhaps even unfit for command. But regardless, the ship set out, completed its cargo delivery in Brazil, and began its return trip to the United States. That's the last confirmed point in its voyage. Then on January 29th, 1921, the Deering was spotted off the coast of North Carolina near Cape Lookout. The ship hailed a nearby lightship, reporting that they'd lost their anchors and needed assistance. But the person who delivered the message didn't sound like the captain. In fact, the lightship's crew thought he sounded off, nervous, untrained. 2 days later, on January 31st, the Carol A. Deering was found run aground at Diamond Shoals, a stretch of shifting sandbars known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Her sails were still up. Her lifeboats were gone. The galley showed signs of recent use. Food left out dishes, half-washed beds hastily made, but not a single person was aboard, not one crew member, and they were never found. No wreckage, no lifeboats, no bodies, just silence. The Coast Guard investigated. So did the FBI. Theories multiplied, faster than barnacles on the hull. Was it pirates? Seems unlikely none of the cargo was taken. Mutiny? Possibly. Maybe the crew overthrew their captain, tried to escape, and met their fate in the rough Atlantic. But then why leave the ship in such a careful, deliberate state? Why take the lifeboats instead of just sailing the Deering into harbor? Another theory pointed to rum runners, Prohibition-era smugglers, who might have hijacked the ship. But there was no sign of struggle, no damage, nothing out of place except for the human absence. And then came the wild card, the Bermuda Triangle. While the Deering didn't disappear within the classic triangle borders, she passed through its edges on her way north. Some claim electromagnetic anomalies or spatial disorientation played a role, that the ship became a victim of the sea's strangest phenomena. Others pointed fingers at government secrecy. Around the same time, the Deering was found another vessel. The SS Hewitt also vanished in the same region. No trace, no wreck, no answers. Was there something more going on? Something hidden beneath the waves? There's even a theory that a communist uprising was to blame. According to a U.S. Department of Justice memo at the time, there was concern that radical foreign agents had infiltrated American ships, attempting to disrupt commerce by sabotaging maritime operations. It all sounds wild until you remember that not one of the Deering's crew was ever seen again. Not at sea, not ashore, not anywhere. The schooner itself was too badly damaged to be salvaged. She was dynamited where she sat, her wooden ribs blown apart and scattered across the shoals like bones. But people remember her. The way she looked when she was found, sails up, wheels still turning slightly in the breeze, as if the crew had only just stepped away for a moment. Local fishermen began to talk about strange lights on the water, about dreams of silent ships. Some swore they heard singing from the shoreline late at night, low voices in foreign tongues, carried on the wind from nowhere. Even now, when storms roll in off the Atlantic, you might hear the name Deering, whispered by sailors watching their radar screens flicker unexpectedly. Some say she's still out there sailing an invisible route, always trying to return to harbor, but never quite making it. You drift past the shoals where she ran aground, and the water here feels different. Shallow, yes, but unsettled, like something stirs just beneath the sand, waiting. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's something else, and somewhere out on the open sea, a schooner glides under full sail. No crew, no sound, just 5 broken masts slicing through fog as the Carol A. Deering sails on, stubbornly refusing to be forgotten. The sea sharpens around you. Not colder exactly, but more alert. Like something's listening now, watching. The waves slap harder against the hull, not playfully this time, but with intent, as though they've carried whispers from the last ship you passed. And ahead, the wind is rising, fast. You hear it before you feel it, deep like a growl. Something is brewing. Because this next ship didn't vanish quietly. It went down in full view of the world. We heard its last words. We know the names of everyone aboard. And somehow, that makes it worse. This is the story of the SS El Faro, a cargo ship that didn't just disappear, but unraveled minute by minute in the grip of a hurricane while the whole world listened too late. She was a workhorse. Built in 1975, the El Faro was a 790-foot-long freighter designed to haul goods between the U.S. mainland and Puerto Rico. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, just steel engines and long hours. She'd made that same run for decades. Jacksonville, Florida, to San Juan and back again. Over and over. She wasn't new, but she was reliable. Until the sea reminded everyone how little that can mean. On September 29, 2015, El Faro left port, carrying cars, containers, and 33 crew members, 28 Americans, and 5 Polish contract workers. The forecast looked manageable. There was a tropical storm forming, yes, but it hadn't been named yet. Nothing serious. But tropical storms are tricky things. Within a day, the storm had grown teeth. It was no longer just weather. It was Joaquin, a swirling monster, accelerating into a Category 3 hurricane. Then Category 4. Winds over 130 miles per hour. Waves the height of small buildings, and El Faro was heading straight for it. Now here's where the story changes. Because this time, we have the black box, the ship's voyage data recorder. That means we don't have to wonder what happened during those final hours. We know. At first, the crew didn't seem too concerned. They joked. They ate breakfast. They talked about the storm. Yes, but they trusted the captain, Michael Davidson, a man with decades of experience, a man who believed they could cut through the edge of the hurricane and keep on schedule. That was his decision. But by the morning of October 1st, everything had changed. The ship had lost propulsion. One of its main boilers failed, cutting engine power. The El Faro couldn't steer, couldn't outrun the storm. It was now a sitting target in the hurricane's deadly eye wall. Inside the bridge, voices turned from calm to desperate. We're not going to make it. We're going to roll. Tell them we're going down. And then silence. The El Faro sank roughly 15,000 feet below the surface, an almost vertical descent into darkness. The ship was found weeks later resting upright on the ocean floor, crushed in places, scarred, but largely intact. All 33 crew members were gone. What haunts people most isn't the wreckage, it's the recordings. The fact that we can hear their final minutes, their fear, their frustration, their attempts to save themselves as the wind screamed and the sea rose around them. This wasn't a ghost ship found years later, food still on the table. This was worse, because we watched it happen in real time. Because we had time to help and didn't. Because somewhere in those conversations is a moment where it could have gone differently. Maybe the captain could have turned back. Maybe the boiler could have held out. Maybe the company should have canceled the trip altogether. But none of that happened. And so the El Faro joined the sea. Her lifeboats were outdated. Open deck exposed to the elements. Useless in a hurricane. One was found later floating upside down, battered and broken. No one had made it out alive. The tragedy sparked public outcry, investigations, congressional hearings. It exposed gaps in maritime regulations and safety protocols that hadn't been updated in decades. The kind that get overlooked until tragedy forces action. But even with the hearings, even with the official reports, some questions still linger. Why did Davidson stick to course knowing Joaquin was strengthening? Why didn't the company intervene? And why was a ship from the 1970s still allowed to sail without modern lifeboats, better satellite tracking, or updated hull modifications, the answers are uncomfortable. They involve schedules, profit, deadlines, the quiet pressure that hangs over every shipping operation. Make it on time or don't make it at all. Time is money, even if the ocean disagrees. And the ocean always disagrees. The wreck of El Faro sits in the darkness now. Cameras captured her on the seabed, massive, silent still. The bridge roof had torn off. Debris fields spread in every direction. And the data recorder? It was eventually recovered after a second expedition. A miracle, really. One of the deepest recoveries of its kind, because the ocean didn't want to give this one back, but somehow it did. It gave us their voices, their words, their final breath. And in doing so, it made El Faro one of the most human ghost stories in maritime history. There are no legends here, no flickering lights on the water, no phantom ships drifting through mist, just real people trapped in an unfolding disaster, trying to survive, trying and failing, because the sea doesn't care how experienced you are. It doesn't care if it's your last trip before retirement, or if your wife is expecting you home, or if you've made that same route 100 times without incident. The sea doesn't care. The ship moves on beneath you now, past the place where El Faro went under. The waves are gentle again, almost tender, as if trying to forget what they did. But you won't forget, not this one, because it wasn't a mystery. It was a warning, and like all warnings at sea, it came too late. There's a certain stillness to the Great Lakes that doesn't feel quite right. A vastness that mimics the sea, but speaks in a different dialect, calmer, colder, quieter. You glide across the surface now, mist curling around your vessel, the moon too shy to show its face. And though you're far from the ocean, the stories don't stop here. Because freshwater can hold secrets just as deep, just as dark, and no secret cuts deeper than the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a steel giant swallowed whole by Lake Superior without so much as a final cry for help. She was a behemoth, 729 feet long, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes. Built in 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald was a marvel of industrial ambition, built to haul iron ore across the inland seas with a kind of quiet grace. She was known as the pride of the American side, and the nickname wasn't just poetic. People genuinely admired her. Crew members said she was smooth, reliable, a good luck ship if you believe in that sort of thing. She carried iron ore from mines in Minnesota, down through the locks of Sault Ste. Marie, through Lake Huron, and into the southern cities that fed America's steel mills. It was hard work, heavy work, but steady, until November 10th, 1975. That day, Edmund Fitzgerald was hauling 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, crushed iron ore across Lake Superior, heading from Superior, Wisconsin to a steel mill in Detroit. Captain Ernest McSorley was at the helm, a veteran of the lakes with decades of experience under his belt. He knew the route, he knew the weather. But that day, the weather had other plans. A storm was brewing fast, brutal, and unpredictable. By the afternoon, wind speeds were pushing 60 miles per hour. Waves towered over 25 feet. Snow fell sideways. Radar visibility flickered in and out. It wasn't just a storm, it was the kind of November squall that Lake Superior is infamous for. Sudden, violent, and utterly merciless. The Fitzgerald was accompanied that day by another ship, the Arthur M. Anderson. They kept radio contact, checking in every hour as the weather worsened. But around 7:10 p.m., Fitzgerald sent its final message. We are holding our own. And then, nothing. No mayday. No distress signal. Just silence. Moments later, The Arthur M. Anderson lost sight of the Fitzgerald on radar. It had disappeared in the time it takes to blink. One moment, she was there struggling, yes, but afloat. The next, she was gone. The Coast Guard launched a search, but found no survivors. All 29 men aboard had vanished with the ship. 2 days later, they located the wreckage 530 feet below the surface of Lake Superior. The ship had broken in two, her bow, and stern resting separately on the lake bed, a few hundred feet apart. Debris was scattered like breadcrumbs across the cold, dark floor. No bodies were ever recovered, and to this day, no one knows exactly why she sank. Some theories point to structural failure. The Fitzgerald had taken on water earlier in the voyage, and her hatch covers may have been damaged. Others suggest she bottomed out, struck a shoal hidden beneath the turbulent water, tearing open her hull. Still others believe it was simply the weight of the storm wave after wave pounding the weakened deck until the steel snapped. Historians still debate whether the ship split before it hit the water or after. Divers who visited the wreck site described the eerie silence. The massive steel hull resting gently on the lake bed. The battered pilot house still standing. The lifeboats, one partially deployed, never launched. And then there's the human layer. Letters from family members. Holiday plans left unfinished. A 21-year-old deckhand sending what would be his final postcard. McSorley, nearing retirement, pushing through one last hard run before leaving the lake behind for good. He didn't make it. The tragedy struck a national nerve. Not just because of the scale of the disaster, but because of its silence, its suddenness, its complete absence of answers. And then came the song. In 1976, Canadian folk singer Gordon Lightfoot released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a haunting ballad that played like a hymn. It told the story in slow, mournful verses. It named the lake, the date, the faces, and with that, the Fitzgerald became more than just a wreck. She became legend, a ghost ship in the truest sense, not because she reappears, but because she never quite leaves. Sailors today still speak her name in low tones. They visit the Whitefish Point Lighthouse near where she vanished. They touch the ship's bell, recovered from the wreck, and placed in a memorial to honor the 29 men who never came home. Some say you can still hear her. Not literally, no creaking masts or phantom footsteps, but in the air, in the water, in the quiet tension that settles over Lake Superior in November, when the wind starts to rise and the snow comes in sideways. You feel it now. Your ship passes slowly over the spot. The lake is calm tonight, glassy, too calm, as if it remembers and is trying not to show it, as if it's holding its breath. You listen just for a second, and somewhere in that silence, you think you hear it. A voice, distant, weary, carried low on the wind. We are holding our own, but no one ever does not out here. And then it's gone. You wake to silence, a different kind. Not peaceful, just empty. Even the waves feel distant now, barely nudging the hull like they've forgotten you're here. A shadow moves ahead, slow and bulky. You brace for thunder or lightning, but none comes. Just fog, dense and curling. Something huge floats into view, gray against gray, bobbing like an uninvited thought you can't shake. A cruise ship, at least it used to be. Now, it looks stripped, starved, unwanted. A drifting carcass. The name is hard to make out at first, but eventually it reveals itself through the mist, like something embarrassed to still exist. Lyubov Orlova. This is the ship that slipped away quietly from human hands and may still be out there circling the ocean like an aimless ghost. It's been called the Cannibal Rat Ship, the undead cruise liner, the floating horror of the North Atlantic. And while parts of that are tabloid sugar, the true story is even weirder. She was born in Yugoslavia in 1976, back when Cold War tensions were still high and Russian luxury meant something very different from its Western counterpart. The Lyubov Orlova was a Soviet-era cruise ship built to carry tourists through Arctic waters, Antarctica, Greenland, the Canadian North. Tough hull, icebreaker frame, small and sturdy, but with just enough charm to lure in well-off travelers hungry for polar adventure. For years, she did exactly that. She sailed the world's coldest corners, ferrying guests to glaciers, fjords, and unpronounceable islands. She wore her Soviet design like a badge, plain practical and a little bit haunted from the start. But the world moved on, and eventually, the Lyubov Orlova was left behind. By 2010, she'd been seized in Newfoundland over unpaid bills, crew wages, port fees, the usual signs of a ship fallen from grace. For nearly 2 years, she sat moored and motionless, slowly rusting a relic in bureaucratic limbo. Then came the decision, sell her for scrap. In January 2013, a tugboat began towing the Lyubov Orlova across the Atlantic to a scrapyard in the Dominican Republic. A long, slow journey south. But the ocean had other plans. Just one day out of port, the towing line snapped in rough weather. The Orlova, weighing over 4,000 tons, broke free and began drifting. No crew, no engine, just current and luck. For a while, she bobbed harmlessly near Canadian waters. Authorities tried to recover her. One plan involved letting her drift into international waters where she would become someone else's problem. Another involved watching to see if she would beach herself. But the North Atlantic is not that forgiving. Then she vanished, disappeared entirely. Satellites lost her. Radar couldn't find her. She slipped into a pocket of ocean, vast and unknowable, and for weeks no one had any idea where she was. Not governments, not shipping companies, not even the Coast Guards who had argued about her fate. It was around this time the rumors began. One report from a Belgian salvage group suggested she might be teeming with rats descendants of those that had infested her during her docked years. With no humans aboard, they would turn on each other. Cannibalism, the ultimate adaptation. The ship, they said, had become a floating ecosystem of madness. Tabloids loved this. Cannibal Rat Ship. Heading for UK coast screamed headlines. Animations of glowing-eyed rodents swarming the decks popped up on YouTube. Journalists asked officials if the plague was about to land in Cornwall. And the best part, no one could prove it wasn't true, because no one could find her. Every few months, new rumors would surface. A possible sighting off the coast of Scotland. A radar blip in the Barents Sea. Once, a lifeboat washed ashore in Ireland, empty and rusted, but its serial numbers couldn't confirm anything. The Lyubov Orlova became a sea myth in real time. Not ancient, not romantic, but deeply modern. The kind of horror born not from monsters, but from paperwork, from abandonment, from a world that let something go and then looked away. Some experts believe she sank. Quietly. No explosion. No tilt. Just water slowly creeping in through compromised steel until one day she dipped beneath the surface and never rose again. But we don't know, because no one watched her go. And that's what makes her different from all the other ghost ships on your voyage. The Kaz to Kirk, the Mary Celeste, the Beichimo. Those stories all began with discovery, with a found ship, a haunting afterward. But the Lyubov Orlova, she wasn't found. She was lost. And for some, that's worse, because every time a cargo ship reports a strange silhouette in the fog, every time a radar pings something it can't explain, off the North Atlantic coast her name resurfaces. Maybe she's there. Maybe she's drifting, covered in rust, overrun with rats. Or maybe empty, clean, silent hollow. Or maybe she's watching. There's something extra creepy about a ship that used to carry tourists. Laughter, champagne, hot coffee, and glacier views. And now nothing. Just sea salt. And the slow groan of metal giving in. Your ship floats near where she was last tracked. The water is calm, too calm, and you wonder just for a second if she's under you. If 4,000 tons of ghost steel rests right below your feet, hidden by a few hundred feet of deceptively peaceful water. If the rats are still alive down there, if they've adapted, built little metal kingdoms inside her ruined cabins. You shake your head, laugh quietly, then glance overboard, just in case. But the sea, as always, gives nothing away. The Lyubov Orlova has gone quiet. She's out there, or she's not, and somehow both feel true. The night deepens. The air presses in a little more tightly now, like a blanket soaked in seawater. It's quiet, but not restful. The kind of silence that feels too deliberate. You pass over a stretch of ocean where the waves seem to hesitate like they know what happened here and don't want to stir it up again. And then through the mist, you see it. Or at least you think you do. A shape in the distance, low, long, lifeless. Smoke stains along the side. The outline of a hull that once held life, now barely more than a rumor. This is the story of the SS Orang Medan. And fair warning, it's one of the eeriest tales ever to slip across the waves. Not because we know exactly what happened, but because we don't. Because every version ends in silence and death. And a ship full of wide-eyed corpses. Let's rewind. The story begins in 1947, or 1948, depending on which version you hear. That's the first problem. Dates are slippery here. So are names logs and testimonies. But the basics remain chillingly consistent. A distress signal crackled over the radios of passing ships somewhere near the Strait of Malacca. A Dutch cargo vessel, identifying itself as the Orang Medan man from Medan, was broadcasting a message. All officers, including Captain dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. And then silence, followed by one final message. I die. Those two words, final, terrifying. A nearby American ship, the Silver Star, picked up the call and immediately changed course. Hours later, they found the Orang Medan adrift, and what they found is still debated today. The crew was dead, every last one of them. Bodies sprawled across the deck. Some had fallen face up, their eyes wide open mouths frozen in silent screams. Others had collapsed mid-step, arms twisted as though warding off something unseen. Even the ship's dog was found dead, bared teeth frozen in a snarl. There were no wounds, no signs of violence, no blood. But the fear etched into their expressions was unmistakable. The bodies, reportedly, were already decomposing faster than normal despite the tropical heat. And though investigators boarded cautiously, no clear cause of death could be identified. And then came the fire. Before any real investigation could begin, smoke began to pour from the lower decks. Suddenly and inexplicably, the Urang Medan exploded. It sank beneath the waves before anyone could recover a single logbook or sample. Gone, erased, like it had never been there at all, which some say it never was, because here's where it gets messy. There are no confirmed shipping records for a vessel called Urang Medan. No port registry, no cargo manifest, no definitive paper trail to prove she ever officially existed. Some researchers argue the ship was real, but its name was falsified, that it may have been carrying something sensitive, illegal, dangerous. One theory suggests chemical weapons, possibly nerve agents or potassium cyanide residues from World War II experiments. If the crew was exposed accidentally, it could explain the violent physical reactions and rapid death. The chemicals could also have ignited, causing the final explosion. But there are problems with this idea. For one, chemical weapon strong enough to kill a whole crew wouldn't leave the bodies looking pristine. Some damage would be visible, and there were no burn marks, no ruptured lungs, just terror. Another theory blames carbon monoxide. A malfunction in the ship's engine room could have filled the vessel with odorless gas, killing the crew in their tracks. It fits some of the facts, but not all. Because carbon monoxide doesn't make your face freeze in fear. It lulls you to sleep, quietly, softly. And then there's the weird stuff. Some say the Urang Medan was cursed, that the ship's name was used to smuggle ancient relics, sacred artifacts looted from Indonesian temples, that the crew brought aboard something that didn't want to be moved. Others claim the ship passed through a supernatural event, a time slip, a magnetic anomaly, a ghost storm. That something crossed into their world just for a moment, long enough to look the crew in the eye and stop their hearts. Historians still debate whether any of this ever really happened. Some believe the Silver Star's involvement was fabricated, though there are American maritime logs that show a vessel of that name in the area at the time. Others argue the entire story is post-war folklore, pieced together from half-truths, foreign language transmissions, and a few overactive imaginations. But here's the thing, even if the story isn't entirely true, it feels true. It behaves like truth. It travels across generations like something that once lived and then died in confusion. People still tell it because something about a crew dying in fear, without wounds, without warning, settles in your mind like fog that won't lift. And maybe that's what really matters. The Urang Medan has never been found. If the wreck still exists, it lies somewhere deep beneath the waves of the Strait of Malacca, hidden under silt and silence. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe the ocean knew what it was doing when it claimed the ship and its story before we could poke and prod too much. Still, every few years, someone launches a new investigation, a new dive, a new satellite scan, hoping to find proof, hoping to find nothing. Either way, the sea remains unbothered. You drift over the spot now, though you'll never know for sure. The water feels heavy here. Not cold, but thick, like it's holding its breath. And suddenly, you understand the frozen faces, the open mouths, the silent screams, because something is here, and it's looking at you. There's a change in the air, one you don't notice at first. A new current beneath the silence. A low hum, deep and wide, like the ocean itself, is remembering something it wishes it could forget. You lean over the railing, peering into the deep, and suddenly your breath catches. Below you, a shape massive, dark, and still rests like a sleeping beast on the seabed. You've found the resting place of the USS Cyclops. This is not a tale of mystery alone. It is a tale of scale, of power, of confidence swallowed in a single moment. The Cyclops was a titan nearly 550 feet long, the largest collier in the U.S. Navy's fleet when she vanished in 1918. A ship designed to endure, to serve to last, and yet she disappeared. Without a trace, no distress call, no wreckage, no lifeboats, nothing. Just 306 souls gone into silence. The USS Cyclops began her life in 1910, a steam-powered bulk cargo ship, sturdy and slow-built, to carry coal to fuel America's growing navy. During World War I, she was reassigned to transport manganese ore, a vital material for steel production, to support the war effort. In March of 1918, she departed from Salvador, Brazil, bound for Baltimore. She'd made that kind of trip before. It was supposed to be routine. She never arrived. Somewhere between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay, she disappeared. And here's the part that chills historians. Even now, the weather was calm. No storms. No reported enemy submarines in the area. No SOS. Nothing on the horizon to hint at danger. Just gone. The ship was overloaded with ore, heavier than it should have been. Some believe structural stress finally cracked her open and she sank fast, nose first, like an anchor. But that still doesn't explain the silence. In an age when even basic ships carried signaling gear, how could such a colossal vessel vanish without a single word? And more importantly, why has no wreck ever been found? That's where the Bermuda Triangle enters the conversation. Yes, the Cyclops vanished within the notorious boundaries of that mysterious zone, a swath of sea stretching from Miami to Bermuda to Puerto Rico. It's a place famous for vanishing aircraft ghost ships and compasses that spin like they've had too much rum. Skeptics roll their eyes at the Bermuda Triangle. They point to weather patterns, human error, and maritime accidents. All true, all valid. But still, the Cyclops was the first major American naval vessel to vanish in peacetime without explanation. And she wasn't the last. Two of her sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, would also vanish years later under eerily similar conditions, both hauling ore through nearly identical routes. 3 ships, hundreds of lives, no trace. Coincidence maybe, or maybe something in that corner of the sea knows how to erase history. There are other theories, of course. Some say the ship was sabotaged, that German agents boarded secretly during the war and hijacked the vessel. Others claim the manganese ore reacted with seawater or the ship's own engines to cause a violent chemical explosion. But again, where is the wreckage? You don't lose something that big without leaving crumbs. Or do you? Captain George W. Worley commanded the Cyclops on her final voyage. And here's where things get even stranger. Worley wasn't exactly well liked. Known for his strictness, odd habits, and short temper, he allegedly wore long underwear year-round and had a penchant for pacing the decks at night, muttering to himself. Rumors swirled that he was mentally unstable. Some even suggested mutiny, that the crew, already stretched thin and frustrated with delays, may have turned on him. That the ship was deliberately sunk or steered into a fatal course. But again, no proof, no witnesses, no closure, just silence. And silence echoes louder at sea than anywhere else. Decades passed. Families waited. The Navy finally declared all hands lost, but never closed the door entirely. The wreck was never located. And in a world where we can map the surface of Mars better than the ocean floor, that's not entirely surprising. Even modern searches with sonar and deep-sea drones have failed to locate the Cyclops' final resting place. It's like she's hiding or being hidden. In the years since the Cyclops has become legend, not just in naval lore, but in whispered bedtime stories and midnight documentaries. A ship so big, so real, that her absence feels impossible. And yet there she isn't. Just water, just horizon, and you floating above where she might be. You feel it now, the weight of the lost, the way the air presses down here heavy with unspoken names. You imagine 306 men working below deck, laughing in the mess hall, writing letters home they'd never send. You picture them standing at the rails, just like you are now, unaware of the moment about to come. A crack, a shudder, a scream, and then down, gone. The sea is good at keeping things, secrets, bodies, ships the size of city blocks. You stare into the deep, hoping for a shimmer of metal, a flash of rusted steel, a shadow that doesn't belong. But all you see is reflection. And maybe that's what the ocean wants, to remind you that nothing, no matter how big, how strong, how certain, is immune to disappearing. Even you're getting used to the quiet now, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that wraps itself around your thoughts and holds on tight. The fog lingers longer between stories. The water feels thicker beneath you. And far ahead, something pale and bloated floats on the waves, rocking gently, like it's waiting for you to come closer. It's not a ghost ship in the traditional sense. No cursed cargo or lost crew with frozen faces. But it doesn't belong here. It never did. This is the story of the MV Ginseng, a ship that should not have existed, but did. And no one, not governments, not port authorities, not even international maritime organizations, can explain where it came from. In March 2006, a routine surveillance flight by Australian customs officials spotted a rusting white cargo ship drifting about 180 kilometers off the coast of Weipa in Queensland. It wasn't broadcasting a distress signal. It wasn't moving, just sitting there, alone. From the air, it looked abandoned, but it was big, around 80 meters long, and in remarkably stable condition. No visible signs of sinking, no immediate damage, just wrong. So they sent a boarding team. The Australian authorities approached the vessel cautiously, unsure what they'd find. Pirates, smugglers, migrants in distress. But as they climbed aboard, the mystery only deepened. The ship was completely deserted. There was no crew, no logbook, no cargo, nothing, except for massive quantities of rice bagged, molded, spoiled, and rotting in the heat. That's it. No name stenciled clearly on the hull. No registration. No identifying numbers on the engine. No flag. Nothing that could anchor the Ginseng to any country, company, or timeline. There were signs that the vessel had once been a resupply ship used to deliver fuel or goods to fishing fleets far out at sea. But even that was speculation. No paperwork, no records. It was like a ghost had built a boat just to mess with people. The ship had been drifting for an unknown amount of time. Its engine wasn't running. Most of its electrical systems were dead. Parts of the deck were rusted through. But otherwise, it hadn't suffered catastrophic damage. It hadn't been attacked. It hadn't caught fire. It hadn't run aground. It had simply been forgotten, or maybe erased. The Australian government, baffled but pragmatic, towed the ship out of shipping lanes and eventually scuttled it at sea. That's a polite way of saying they sank it on purpose, eliminated the hazard, no questions answered. And if the story had ended there, it might have faded from memory. But it didn't, because no one could figure out where the Ginseng had come from. Shipping databases turned up nothing. No country claimed it. No missing vessel matched its dimensions. No shipping company ever reported it stolen or lost. Maritime authorities tried matching it to ghost fleet records, long retired vessels, even scrapped hulls, but none fit the profile. Some theories emerged, of course. One held that it was an old Chinese supply ship, possibly abandoned during illegal fishing operations. Its crew may have jumped ship in the night, ferried back to safety by accomplices leaving the vessel to drift. But if that were the case, why leave all that rice behind, and why strip the ship of every trace of identity? Another theory points to IUU fishing illegal, unreported, and unregulated boats that operate beyond national jurisdiction. These ghost fleets often use disposable vessels to supply illegal operations, and when the boats outlive their usefulness, they're abandoned. But the Jianseng didn't look like a throwaway. It looked like someone tried to hide it on purpose. Others think it may have been a training vessel stripped down for decommissioning and accidentally set adrift. But again, no registration, no ownership, no trace in the paperwork maze of global shipping. And that's the thing about the Jianseng. It wasn't scary in the usual sense. It didn't scream. It didn't sink suddenly. No one saw eerie lights or heard phantom cries in the night. But it shouldn't have been there. It slipped past radar, past maritime law, past every net we've built to keep track of the things we send across the sea. And that makes it terrifying. Because if a ship that size 8 stories long can appear out of nowhere, what else is floating out there? What else drifts between the lines, forgotten by governments, ignored by satellite, untouched by law? How many vessels have we already lost track of? The ocean is too big to monitor fully. For every GPS beacon and AIS tracker, there are ships like the Jianseng, dead but drifting, waiting to be noticed. And some maybe never will be. Australia tightened its maritime surveillance in the wake of the Jianseng. Tighter flight paths, more active radar sweeps, but they never found anything like it again. Or if they did, they didn't say, "You drift over the place where they scuttled her." The water is still, no ripples, just a strange green shimmer under the surface, like light bouncing off rusted steel far below. And you think of all the blank hulls floating out there, crewless, purposeless, borderless. You imagine boarding one and finding a table set for a meal no one ever ate, a phone ringing softly, a light flickering even though the generator's off. Maybe they're harmless, but maybe they're not, because a ghost ship doesn't have to be haunted. It just has to be unclaimed. And the Jianseng was the loneliest thing the ocean had seen in a long, long time. The sky is lighter now, but not because of the sun. It's that dull, aching kind of daylight that spills over the horizon without ever quite waking the world. Gray on gray. Sea and sky melting together in quiet agreement. And somewhere ahead, a vessel drifts that's so old it seems part of the ocean itself, bleached by salt, softened by time. This is the story of the HMS Blenheim, a royal warship that vanished not once, but twice first, from the maps, then from the memory of history. And one of the men aboard her wasn't just a sailor. He was an admiral, a legend, and possibly a ghost. The Blenheim was a ship of the line, a beast of a vessel built for the British Royal Navy. Launched in 1813 and named after a famous victory from the War of the Spanish Succession, she served proudly for years. 74 guns, 3 decks nearly 200 feet long, she was no dainty clipper. By the mid-1800s, though, she was showing her age. The Napoleonic Wars were over. The world was shifting. And the Blenheim was eventually reassigned to duties far from the theaters of grand sea battles. In 1807, she was ordered to sail from Bombay to the Cape of Good Hope, an important British colonial link between India and South Africa. A routine voyage, or so it seemed. She left port in February with 590 men aboard. That included one of the most senior officers in the Royal Navy, Rear Admiral Sir Thomas Trowbridge. Trowbridge wasn't just any admiral. He had fought alongside Horatio Nelson, survived the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, and been knighted for his valor. His inclusion on the voyage should have been a matter of confidence. Instead, it became a footnote in a Vanishing. Because the HMS Blenheim never arrived, she was expected to make landfall in a matter of weeks. Instead, she disappeared into the Indian Ocean and was never heard from again. No distress signals, no survivors. Not a single piece of the ship or the hundreds aboard was ever recovered. But the Blenheim didn't go quietly into obscurity. Over the decades, rumors surfaced. Whispers from merchant vessels spoke of a three-decked warship spotted drifting far from trade routes, sometimes fully intact, sometimes battered, always silent. One account came from a merchant captain who swore he saw the Blenheim off the coast of Madagascar, its sails ragged, its cannons rusted, but still afloat. He claimed to have hailed her only to hear no reply. Just the wind. Just a distant figure in a faded officer's coat standing at the wheel. A man with white hair and a dark beard. Trowbridge. At least that's how the stories go. Ghost ships are often rooted in tragedy. But the Blenheim's mystery cuts deeper because of its scale. Nearly 600 men lost. An entire warship. No wreckage, no wreck site. It was as if the sea swallowed her whole and pressed a finger to its lips. So, what could have happened? Some historians speculate that the ship was in poor condition. Leaks had been reported before departure. Her timbers were soft with age. Tropical waters can be cruel to old wood and weak seals. A sudden storm, even a moderate one, could have cracked her wide open. Others suggest overloaded cargo or poor ballasting. If the ship listed too far in a storm, the weight of her own guns might have pulled her under. But again, no trace. Even the notoriously wreck-prone Indian Ocean tends to give back something eventually. A barrel, a lifeboat, a nameplate. Nothing from the Blenheim. What adds to the eeriness is the figure of Trowbridge himself. Known as a strict disciplinarian and a fiercely loyal officer, he had narrowly avoided death before. In fact, he'd once been shipwrecked with Nelson and survived by climbing cliffs in Portugal barefoot. The man had grit, and to have him vanish, just vanish, is like having an old lighthouse collapse silently in the night. And then came the dream. Years later, a naval lieutenant serving in the East Indies wrote of a strange vision he'd had during a fever at sea. In it, he stood aboard a waterlogged warship, drifting under a pale sky. The sails hung like curtains. The deck was slick with seawater, and a voice behind him said, "She will not make landfall." When he turned, there was no one there. Just a worn admiral's hat abandoned on the wheel. That kind of story doesn't make it into official records, but sailors talk, and the sea listens. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened to the Blenheim. She became one of the Royal Navy's greatest unsolved disappearances. A reminder that even the mightiest ships carrying the most celebrated men can simply not arrive. And in an era before black boxes, before satellite beacons, before 24/7, tracking a ship could leave port and vanish into the fog without so much as a ripple. You float now over the general coordinates of her last known route. Somewhere down there, perhaps beneath coral, perhaps inside a silted trench, lie the bones of a ship that refused to tell her story. And maybe Trubridge is still standing at the helm waiting for the orders that never came. You stare into the sea, and for a moment you see a shape, broad, wooden, majestic, even in ruin. But when you blink, it's gone, and the ocean resumes its quiet humming, as if to say, not yet. You've traveled far enough now that the sea feels different. Not calmer, not rougher, just more secretive, as though the water itself knows what's coming next and would rather you didn't ask. The wind dies down, the fog thickens, and there ahead you see it again. Another ship, low in the water, no lights. Not approaching, but not retreating either. It's waiting. This is the story of the SS Poet, a modern ghost ship swallowed whole by the Atlantic, with no war, no storm, no warning. Just absence. And absence, when stretched over enough years, becomes something worse than tragedy. It becomes silence with teeth. The SS Poet was a bulk carrier. She was built in 1944 as a troop transport ship during World War II, but in the decades that followed, she was converted and renamed for commercial work. By the 1980s, she was hauling grain feed and other bulk cargo across the Atlantic, unremarkable work for an aging ship. She wasn't fast, she wasn't new, but she had a seasoned crew, and she had done this kind of trip many times. On October 24, 1980, the Poet departed Philadelphia, bound for Port Said, Egypt. Her cargo was corn, 13,500 tons of it, destined to help stabilize food shortages in the Middle East. The ship carried 34 men, most of them American, many of them experienced. A simple voyage, straight across the Atlantic, down through the Mediterranean. Smooth sailing. At least that's what everyone expected. For 4 days, all was quiet. The Poet checked in by radio on October 26th, reporting calm seas and steady progress. And then nothing. No further messages. No weather reports. No distress signals. Just silence. The Poet never arrived in Egypt. When it became clear the ship was overdue, the U.S. Coast Guard initiated a search. Massive aerial sweeps over the North Atlantic covered thousands of square miles. They found no wreckage, no life rafts, not even a floating container. The Poet had disappeared, as if she'd fallen into a fold in the ocean. And that's where the real mystery begins. The ship wasn't sailing through a war zone. The weather had been fair. The vessel had passed all recent inspections. And the crew, familiar with the ship, familiar with the route. No signs of trouble. So what happened? Some investigators speculated that structural failure had caused the ship to break apart mid-voyage. After all, she was nearly 40 years old. And like many vessels of her era, she was built quickly during wartime efficiency over endurance. But if she broke apart, wouldn't there be debris? Wouldn't at least one lifeboat have surfaced? Some piece of the hull? Something. Others floated the idea of a sudden rogue wave, one of those towering, unpredictable walls of water that sometimes rise from nowhere. The kind that doesn't just swamp a ship, but buries it. Cracks it open. Drags it down before anyone can react. But again, no evidence. No floating cargo, no signal, no confirmation, just missing. And then came the whispers, not supernatural, not glowing eyes in the fog, but worse, geopolitical whispers. Some believed the Poet's cargo, officially grain, might have contained more than food, that the ship was also carrying unlisted military equipment as part of a covert deal between the US and Egypt. That it may have been targeted, that someone somewhere wanted her gone. There's no official record of such cargo, but there wouldn't be, would there? Another theory suggests the poet fell victim to a Cold War submarine mistaken for a hostile vessel, or deliberately sunk to prevent arms from reaching a volatile region. The US government's response to the disaster only added fuel to the fire. The investigation was delayed. Families received vague letters. A full report took years to complete and offered little more than educated guesses. It all felt too quiet. And for the loved ones left behind, silence is the worst kind of answer. Some families held private memorials. Others refused to give up hiring independent investigators, demanding more information. But no one ever found a piece of the ship. No wreck dive. No confirmed location. Nothing. Just the wide Atlantic, stretching from horizon to horizon, as if daring anyone to look deeper. And here's the part that sticks with you. The poet was built for war. She had sailed through dangerous waters. She had survived decades of service. But her final voyage wasn't through gunfire or storms. It was through calm seas. In peacetime, with a cargo of grain, and still she vanished. Historians still debate whether she broke apart or was struck by something below, whether she was sabotaged or simply unlucky. But in the end, the SS Poet is remembered not just for her loss, but for the silence that followed, the unanswered questions, the gap in the sea where a ship used to be. You drift now through that very stretch of water. No buoys, no marker, just a place on the map where something used to exist. You imagine the poet beneath you, resting in two pieces, the corn still sealed in rusted holds, the crew still strapped to the consoles, unaware of how final the moment would be. Or maybe she's somewhere else entirely, sailing still, drifting, waiting for someone to notice. You look down. The water is strangely clear here, and for a heartbeat you think you see a light, but it fades. And the ocean pulls the silence tighter. The fog rolls back in thick as wool and twice as heavy. Your ship groans against the gentle pull of the current, and you realize the sky is gone. No stars, no moon, just a blanket of gray above gray below. It's the perfect stage for the next story, and you feel it before you see it. A quiet, a wrongness, like a page already turned before you were ready. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, the most famous ghost ship of all time. Not because it was the first, not because it was the deadliest, but because it was just too perfect, too clean, too quiet. A textbook mystery that still refuses to be solved. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York Harbor on November 7th, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. She was a two-masted brigantine, sturdy and reliable, carrying a cargo of over 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol, a high-proof substance used in industrial applications. On board were the ship's captain, Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and a crew of 7. 10 people, a safe ship, calm weather. They were never seen again. On December 5th, 1872, just under a month later, a British ship called the Dei Gratia spotted the Mary Celeste drifting aimlessly about 400 miles off the coast of Portugal. The sea was calm. The sails were partially set. No signals. No signs of distress. When they boarded her, what they found was both ordinary and disturbing. The ship was completely seaworthy. Her cargo was mostly intact. The crew's belongings were untouched. The galley was stocked with food and fresh water for 6 months. The captain's logbook was in place, with its final entry dated 10 days earlier. But the lifeboat was gone, and the people gone too. No blood, no signs of violence, no struggle, just absence. Even the crew's pipes and boots were still on board. A half-written letter, sewing supplies, toys belonging to little Sophia. The kind of ordinary life things people don't leave behind unless something goes terribly, terribly wrong. So what happened? That's the question that's haunted historians and late-night storytellers for over 150 years. Let's walk through the possibilities. The simplest theory is weather. A sudden squall or waterspout may have panicked the crew into abandoning ship. Perhaps they believed the alcohol cargo had leaked and feared an explosion. They could have boarded the lifeboat, temporarily tied to the main vessel, only to have the rope snap in rough seas. It's possible, but doesn't explain why an experienced captain like Briggs would leave behind a perfectly safe ship in calm weather. Another idea, pirates. But nothing was stolen. No valuables, no signs of a raid, no violence. And pirates typically don't leave ships adrift. They take them. Mutiny, maybe. But again, there were no signs of a fight, and Briggs was respected, not feared. His crew was hand-picked, loyal, clean records. One of the more chilling theories involves fumes from the alcohol. Some believe the barrels may have leaked and filled the hold with explosive vapor. No flames, no explosion, but just enough to spook everyone. Picture this: the crew smells something. Gasoline sharp. The captain checks the cargo. It's leaking. They hear a creak, a hiss. Someone panics. They lower the lifeboat just in case. The rest follow. They wait a safe distance. And then before they can return a wave, a current, a snapped line, gone. The Mary Celeste sails on without them, still floating, still alive, while they drift away. Helpless. It fits, unsettlingly well. But then there's the darker side. Some think Captain Briggs went mad, killed his family, ordered the crew overboard one by one, then took his own life. But there's no evidence, no blood, no damage to the interior, no journals turned ranting, no note. Others believe the crew drank the alcohol, went mad and mutinied. But denatured alcohol is poisonous. And again, no bodies were found. Then there are the far edges, sea monsters, aliens, a time slip, some force in the Atlantic that plucked the crew into the sky like clawed fingers from a storm cloud. And as silly as those sound, they're no more conclusive than any of the others. What makes the Mary Celeste so unsettling is that every theory seems almost right, but not quite. Like a puzzle missing one vital piece. And that's what makes it linger. The ship was towed to Gibraltar. The salvors expected a reward, but instead were met with suspicion. The British authorities smelled something foul. Insurance fraud conspiracy. But after a lengthy investigation, no charges were ever filed. The ship was eventually returned to commercial service, but she was never quite the same. Owners changed. Crews turned over quickly. Some believed she was cursed. She ran aground once. Another time, she was involved in a suspicious cargo scam. And in 1885, after more than a decade of bad luck, she was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti as part of an insurance scheme. Even her death was dishonest, but the legend remained. Books, films, songs. The Mary Celeste became a shorthand for unsolved nautical mystery. A ghost ship in the purest sense, not because she glowed or moaned or reappeared, but because she was real and wrong. You drift alongside her now, at least the version you hold in your mind. The sails flutter lazily. The rigging sways with no hands to grip it. Below deck, the table is set. A child's toy waits on the floor. A coat hangs neatly by a door that no one ever opened again. And somewhere, in that vast silence, 10 people have vanished. Not into the sea, not into legend, but into something worse, the unknown. There's a change in the light now. A thinning, like the sun, is trying to break through, but isn't quite strong enough. Your ship rocks gently on long, slow swells, and somewhere out on the edge of the horizon, a shadow begins to form. It's sleek, sharp, and regal, like a ship meant for display, not disappearance. And yet disappear it did. This is the story of HMS Atalanta, a training vessel filled with young cadets, nearly all of them barely out of childhood. A ship that set out to prepare boys to become men of the Royal Navy, and instead never returned at all. It was 1880. The HMS Atalanta was what they called a training frigate, a ship designed not for war or commerce, but for discipline, for learning, for transforming wide-eyed schoolboys into hardened sailors ready to serve the British Empire. She had once been a warship. Launched in 1844 under the name Juno, she had patrolled distant waters for decades before being refitted for this new purpose. Her guns were removed, her decks scrubbed and polished, her hammocks filled with boys, many as young as 14, all eager to earn their stripes. When she left port from Bermuda, on January 31st, she was headed for Falmouth, England, a standard training return journey across the Atlantic. On board were over 280 people, most of them cadets. Boys who wrote letters home talking about the excitement of life at sea, about how the food wasn't so bad, about how they missed their mothers but were proud to wear the uniform. And then, nothing. The ship never arrived. No distress call, no flares, no drifting wreckage, no survivors. Just one more ship added to the long list of lost with all hands. At first, the British Navy waited. Weather delays were common. Communications took time. But weeks passed, then months, and gradually, hope dimmed. By midsummer, HMS Atalanta was officially listed as missing. The Empire moved on, but the families did not. What could have happened? The prevailing theory points to weather. A powerful storm was reported in the Atlantic shortly after her departure. Not a named hurricane, those wouldn't be systematically tracked for decades, but a violent squall, the kind that strikes with little warning and no mercy. And the Atalanta, for all her grandeur, had flaws. She was top-heavy, unstable under sail if mishandled. Many of the cadets on board had never faced serious weather before. Their training was recent, hurried, and mostly theoretical. Officers may have overestimated the boys' ability to respond in a real emergency. A sudden gust, a misjudged tack, a roll too far. And just like that, a capsizing. One terrifying moment, and nearly 300 lives slipped under the Atlantic. It's a simple theory. Too simple. Because even shipwrecks leave clues. Lifeboats, barrels, bits of wood, floating evidence of something gone wrong. But the sea left nothing behind, only silence. And the rumors came, as they always do. Some claimed the ship had been taken by mutineers cadets rising against cruel officers. That it was seen off the coast of South America, renamed sailing under a pirate flag. Others said she'd made it to shore during the storm, but crashed into rocks along an uninhabited stretch of coastline, her remains quickly buried under sand and time. One strange account even came from a merchant sailor who claimed years later to have seen a wreck matching her description lodged deep in a coral reef near the Azores. But no official expedition ever confirmed it. And so she remains a question mark, a tall ship filled with boys, all gone, all forgotten by the sea, and eventually by most of history, but not entirely. If you visit old naval archives in Britain, you'll find poems written by grieving mothers, newspaper clippings calling for answers, and in a few small towns, memorials built for boys who never came home. Some families waited for years believing, hoping that a telegram might arrive, that perhaps the boys had been shipwrecked on a remote island surviving like castaways, learning to fish, build shelters, wait for rescue. But the rescue never came, because the island didn't exist, only the ocean, and its silence. What's often forgotten is how young they really were. Most of the cadets weren't old enough to vote. Some weren't old enough to shave. They died before they could become sailors, before they had a chance to prove anything beyond the fact that they were too young to be out there in the first place. You drift now over the rough coordinates of her last known position. There's no marker, no buoy, just open water. And the waves are small today, gentle, deceptive. You think of the boys laughing on deck, swinging from rigging, writing letters in cramped quarters. You imagine the officers teaching drills, shouting orders, trying to keep order on a ship filled with chaos and youth. And then you imagine the moment when the sea changed its mind. A sudden gust, a tilt, a scream, and then darkness. Not just for the ship, but for everyone who loved someone on board. Somewhere below the remains may still exist, buried in sand, entangled in coral, held tight by the weight of 140 years. Or maybe not. Maybe the Atalanta was taken by something older than weather. Not a storm, not a reef, but a silence that eats steel and swallows voices. You look into the water, it doesn't blink, and neither do you. The mist thickens again, clinging to your clothes and creeping into your lungs with every breath. The world narrows to the sound of waves tapping gently against the hull and the slow hiss of sea spray on weathered wood. You're drifting now into colder water, where the sun rarely lingers, and ships behave strangely. Some vanish without warning, and some, like the Resolven, drift for days, with no crew, no lifeboat, and no clear reason why. It's not the most famous ghost ship story. It doesn't appear in many history books, but that only makes it more unsettling. Because the Resolven didn't vanish without a trace. It was found, perfectly intact, and nobody was home. Let's go back to August 1884. The Resolven was a small merchant brig built in Nova Scotia and operated out of Canada. She was sturdy, modest, and simple, a coal transport vessel meant for short trips across the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. On this particular voyage, she was hauling coal from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, to a port in Labrador. It should have been routine, but in these waters, routine rarely lasts long. The Resolven was spotted just a few days later adrift in the icy strait between Labrador and Newfoundland. She wasn't flying any distress flags. Her sails were up, though slack. No smoke from the chimney, no lights, just drifting. A passing Royal Navy ship, the HMS Mallard, sent a crew to investigate. What they found was eerie but calm. The Resolven was in good shape. Not pristine, but seaworthy. No signs of storm damage, no splintered hull. The cargo of coal was untouched. The lifeboat, however, was gone, and so was everyone. 7 crew members and the captain's wife all vanished. Below deck, the logbook stopped abruptly. Food was left half prepared in the galley. Dishes sat on the table, unwashed. The oil lamps were still full. The captain's cabin showed no signs of a struggle. Everything, every little detail suggested the crew had left in a hurry. But why? There were no signs of fire, no leaks, no missing sails. no loose rigging, no indication of anything life-threatening that would justify abandoning a perfectly good vessel into the cold Labrador Sea, especially with the water temperature hovering just above freezing. In those conditions, a lifeboat wouldn't last long. Minutes maybe, hours at most. So, what would make an entire crew willingly step off the Resolven and into almost certain death? Some theories propose a collision with an iceberg, not a massive one. A glancing blow, perhaps, enough to spook the crew into thinking the hull was compromised. They may have heard a noise below deck, a creak, a groan, and assumed the worst. Panicking, they launched the lifeboat, hoping to stay close until the situation could be assessed. But then maybe a wave, a separation, a sudden current, and the Resolven kept going while they didn't. But if the hull was breached, why didn't the ship sink? And why didn't they leave a note, a flag, something? Others suggest foul play. Pirates in those waters, unlikely. Smugglers, also improbable. But mutiny, fear, paranoia maybe. Maybe something happened between crew members. A fight, an argument, something that escalated beyond reason. Maybe the crew turned on their captain. Maybe the captain's wife witnessed something she wasn't supposed to see. But again, no sign of struggle. No blood. No broken furniture. Just absence. And that's the part that gets under your skin. It's not a dramatic mystery. There are no bones, no bloodstains, no flaming wreckage. Just a quiet ship, drifting alone in the fog. Like someone pressed pause when the Resolven was finally towed to port and examined. Officials couldn't find a single mechanical reason for abandonment. She wasn't leaking. Her masts were fine. The cargo was secured. The helm was slightly off course, but not dramatically so. She was fine, just empty. So they wrote up a report, logged the names of the missing, sent letters to the families, and moved on. But the sea doesn't move on. In coastal towns along Newfoundland, some still whisper about the Resolven. They say on foggy mornings you can spot her twin, a pale ship drifting just beyond the rocks. Her sails slack, her deck empty. Some say she still waits for her crew to return. Others say the sea took them because they saw something they shouldn't have. One old tale even claims that the lifeboat didn't sink, that it came ashore months later, miles away, with no one inside. But 9 sets of boots. That's 2 more than should have been there. No one knows who added the extra shoes, or why. You glide now over the stretch of water where she was found, and it feels wrong. The waves are too still. The air hangs like breath not yet released. You look down, half expecting to see a shadow of a brig drifting just beneath the surface sails, fluttering like ghostly wings. But there's nothing. Just a ship that should have never been empty, and a silence that still hasn't given up its answer. The Resolven remains a quiet riddle, not cursed, not famous, just lost. And somehow, that's the most haunting kind of story of all. The cold begins to sting now. Not a sharp pain, but a slow, creeping chill that sinks into your skin and settles somewhere behind your ribs. The sea here feels different, older, wiser, less forgiving. You pass through sheets of drifting ice that clink against the hull, like glass marbles, and far ahead, something massive moves through the mist. It isn't sinking. It should have. It tried. But the sea for once didn't finish the job. This is the story of the SS Valencia, a ship that refused to die. A ghost, not because it was haunted, but because it simply kept going. Built in Sweden in 1914 and operated by the Hudson's Bay Company, the Valencia was a steel-hulled cargo steamer. She was designed to endure tough northern voyages, hauling furs, goods, and supplies between trading posts along Canada's Arctic coast. Not glamorous, not flashy, just dependable and stubborn. In 1931, on what was meant to be a routine, late-season voyage, the Bedtime became trapped in early ice off the coast of Alaska. She wasn't alone. Arctic shipping was always a gamble, especially in October. But her position made rescue difficult. Her crew hunkered down hoping for a thaw. It didn't come. The ice only grew thicker. Eventually, the company arranged an emergency airlift, evacuating most of the crew. But a handful of men stayed behind to keep watch, determined to salvage the ship if they could. Then a blizzard hit. Visibility dropped to 0, and when it cleared, the Bedtime was gone. Just like that. She'd broken free of the ice and drifted away. Everyone assumed she'd sunk. A quiet death beneath the Arctic's glassy surface. But a week later, she reappeared, 15 miles from where she'd last been seen, stuck in new ice upright, as if nothing had happened. The crew decided she wasn't safe to sail anymore. The damage was too extensive. She was abandoned, left to her fate. But the Bedtime didn't sink. She floated. And that's when the legend began. Over the next few decades, the Bedtime was spotted again, and again, and again, by whalers, by Inuit hunters, by coastal villagers, sometimes trapped in ice, sometimes drifting freely, always alone. She became a phantom presence along the Alaskan coast, a steel ghost bobbing in and out of visibility, like she was playing some long private game with the sea. In 1933, a group of Inupiat boarded her and found her mostly intact. They took shelter inside during a storm, dry, protected, safe. When the storm passed, they left her behind and she drifted on. In 1939, a group of explorers tried to board and salvage her. A storm forced them off. She vanished again. Sightings continued into the 1940s, the 1950s, even into the early 1960s. Always the same story. She appears drifting rusted but unbowed, then slips away before anyone can get a line on her. In 1969, nearly 40 years after she was abandoned, the last confirmed sighting of the Bedtime was recorded. She was stuck in pack ice, still afloat, still stubbornly refusing to sink. And then nothing. No more sightings, no wreck, no debris, just gone. Some say she finally gave in, sank quietly beneath the Arctic, settling into silt, like a tired animal curling up to sleep. Others believe she's still out there, hidden by ice, only visible when the light hits just right. And then there are those who whisper that she was never a ship at all, not really. That something older wears her shape. That the Bedtime is a trick, a lure, a test. That those who try to claim her never return. But let's stay grounded. There's something deeply human about the story of the Bedtime. She wasn't cursed. She wasn't haunted. She just refused to go. She became something more than a vessel. She became a myth in motion, a warning, a symbol that, in the face of everything, the weather, the cold, the abandonment, sometimes things persist, and maybe they shouldn't. Because the Bedtime wasn't alive, but she didn't act like she knew that. She wandered, she watched, she outlived everyone who once sailed her. You drift now through the ice-choked waters she once called home, and for a moment, you swear you see something. A rusted stack, a twisted mast, the silhouette of a cargo steamer peeking through the mist. You blink, gone. But something's still there. You feel it. A pressure, a presence. Not threatening, not comforting. Just present. Like you're not the only thing still floating here. The cold here feels deeper. Less like weather, more like memory. The kind of cold that seeps through your boots, and climbs your spine like a whisper you can't quite shake. The sea is still, absolutely still. And ahead, two shadows rise from the icy fog, side by side, stark and low in the water. Their masts long gone, their names nearly erased. These are the bones of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, the twin ships of Britain's most infamous lost expedition. Together, they carried 129 men into the heart of the Arctic in search of glory. None of them came back. This was the Franklin expedition, and what happened to them remains one of the coldest, cruelest mysteries in the history of exploration. Let's rewind to 1845. The British Empire was at its peak, and with much of the world already charted and conquered, attention turned to the last great unknown, the Northwest Passage. A sea route through the Arctic that could connect Europe to Asia by water-cutting, weeks-off trade voyages and cementing Britain's control of global commerce. Sir John Franklin, already a decorated Arctic explorer in his 60s, was chosen to lead the mission. Two ships were assigned, Erebus and Terror, both refitted warships, reinforced with iron hulls stocked with 3 years' worth of food, coal-fired engines, libraries, instruments, and even hand-cranked desalinators to make seawater drinkable. It was the height of 19th century naval innovation. They left London in May 1845 and vanished. For years, nothing was heard. At first, Britain wasn't worried these were Arctic explorers after all. Delays were expected, but as months turned into years, concern turned to panic. Dozens of search parties were launched between 1848 and 1859. They found clues scattered across hundreds of miles of frozen coastline. A stone cairn here, a note there. Skeletons huddled beside overturned boats. Empty campsites preserved in the permafrost like time capsules. One note dated April 25th, 1848 revealed the horror in brief clinical detail. Erebus and Terror had been trapped in ice near King William Island since 1846. Franklin had died the year before. The remaining crew, now down to 105 men, had abandoned the ships and were marching south in hopes of rescue. They didn't make it. Every last one of them died of cold starvation, scurvy, and something worse. Over time, Inuit oral histories and archaeological evidence painted a bleak picture. The men had begun to eat each other. Cut marks on bones confirmed it. Cannibalism, desperation, one of the finest expeditions ever launched, had ended in darkness, madness, and ice. And the ships, gone. For over 160 years, their final resting places were unknown. Then, in 2014, out of nowhere, HMS Erebus was found, resting in shallow water off the coast of Nunavut, shockingly well preserved, its deck still intact beneath the silt. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered, even more pristine, its cabins untouched, its hull seemingly unbroken. It was as though the sea had taken them and then carefully placed them down like offerings to something older. And suddenly, the mystery changed. Now, we could see the ships, we could touch them, but the silence remained. Why did Franklin sail directly into the ice without adapting to Inuit knowledge? Why were the ships abandoned when they still appeared seaworthy? Why did they wait nearly 2 years before trying to walk to safety? And most hauntingly, what happened in those final weeks? Some say lead poisoning played a role. The tinned food on board had been sealed poorly with high levels of lead that may have caused hallucinations, weakness, and erratic behavior. Others point to botulism, starvation, and scurvy, all plausible. But there's no one left to ask. And the logs, if they still exist, remain locked inside frozen cabins deep beneath the waves. Divers who have visited the wrecks describe eerie stillness. Plates still on tables, Beds made, drawers filled with letters never sent, everything preserved, everything waiting. Even now, marine archaeologists return each summer to explore the wrecks inch by inch, hoping to recover documents, instruments, anything that might tell us what those final days were like. But the Arctic keeps its secrets close. You drift now above their resting place, and the water here isn't just cold, it's ancient. You can feel it pressing against the hull of your own ship, like a hand warning you to turn back. You imagine the men of the Erebus and Terror wrapped in rags, stumbling through snow, blind and starving. Some tried to carry boats over the ice. Others simply lay down and closed their eyes, and below the ships remained still silent, waiting for a rescue that never came. You look over the side now, and for a moment, just a moment, you think you see the outline of a hull beneath the waves. Dark, vast, patient. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe it's terror still watching. The sea here is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not eerie or tense, but bruised. Like the ocean itself is still recovering from something it doesn't talk about. The air feels stretched, the clouds hanging lower than they should. And then on the horizon, you spot a vessel too small to belong in such a vast story. A trim little boat, almost cheerful in shape, until you notice that it's tilting its paint, worn thin, its decks empty. This is the MV Yoida, a ship that was found half sunken, abandoned in the middle of the Pacific. Not sunk, not storm-wrecked, just sitting there. And what it left behind was not just a mystery, but a series of unanswered questions, each one colder than the last. Let's go back to October 3rd, 1955. The Joyita, a 69-foot merchant vessel, left the port of Apia in Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands. On board were 25 people, 16 crew, and 9 passengers, including a doctor en route to perform surgery, 2 children, and several traders. The cargo: typical medical supplies, food, timber, and barrels of oil. The seas were reportedly calm when the Joyita set sail. She never arrived. 5 weeks later, she was spotted by a merchant aircraft adrift over 600 miles off course, listing badly to one side. She looked dead, but not sunken. When rescuers boarded her, what they found was baffling. First, the good news: she was still floating. Barely. Now the bad news: there was no one aboard. Not a single soul. The radio was tuned to the distress frequency, but wasn't working. The logbook, navigational equipment, and firearms were missing. So were the 4 tons of cargo. Blood-stained bandages were found in the galley. A doctor's bag lay open on the deck, and the lifeboats gone, along with all the life vests. There were signs that someone had tried to rig a temporary shade on the deck using canvas and oars. Someone had prepared for heat for exposure, but not for abandoning ship. The engine wasn't running, and the wiring had been messed with, possibly tampered, or just failed. The auxiliary pump was found disassembled. Her hull was sound, but she was taking on water. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Still, the Joyita was unsinkable. Her hull was filled with cork and sealed airtight compartments, making her virtually impossible to fully submerge. Even with engine failure, even with some flooding, she should have remained afloat long enough to await rescue. So why did everyone leave? Why risk lifeboats in the open Pacific when the ship was safer? One theory is that the captain, Thomas Miller, had been injured, perhaps severely. That the crew panicked without him, especially after the engine failed and the radio broke down. Maybe someone mistook the slow flooding as a sign the ship was going under and ordered an evacuation. But why not leave a message? Why the blood? Why take the cargo and lifeboats if it was truly just panic? And why, in all the massive search operations launched afterward, were none of the 25 people or the lifeboats ever found? The area where the Joyita was discovered is vast, yes, but not untraceable. Debris floats. So do people, even if only briefly. But in this case, there was nothing. Not a single body. Not a life vest. Just that eerie little ship, tilted like a broken toy in a bathtub. Another theory suggests piracy. That someone boarded the Joyita, took what they wanted, cargo fuel, anything of value, and killed or kidnapped the passengers and crew. The disassembled radio missing weapons and blood evidence seem to support that. But again, no signs of struggle. No bullet holes. No damage to the ship. And pirates don't typically leave floating evidence. Then there's the theory of insurance fraud, that the ship was sabotaged on purpose, made to look like an accident. But there's no clear beneficiary. No sign the ship was intentionally damaged. In fact, the damage was so minimal that the Joyita was repaired and returned to service until she was finally scrapped in the 1970s. But her reputation stayed. Sailors refused to board her. Some claimed she was cursed. Others whispered that she still carried the shadows of those 25 souls, all of them waiting quietly on the deck when no one was looking. And here's where it gets darker. One piece of cargo that went missing was a shipment of medical morphine, enough to be valuable, enough to make people desperate. Did someone on board try to steal it? Was the doctor involved? Was there a conflict? And was that what led to the blood? The chaos? The sudden disappearance? We'll never know. No official cause was ever determined. No charges filed. Just a final entry in the log of maritime mysteries. A ship found floating full of eerie signs, but empty of answers. You pass her now, your ship drifting silently past where the Joyita was recovered, and you imagine her listing in the water, her decks tilting toward the sky, the canvas shade flapping loosely in the wind, the silence stretching for days as the sun bakes the empty wheelhouse. You picture someone crawling toward the radio, adjusting the dial to the distress channel one last time, knowing no one's coming, and then stepping into a lifeboat, not because they wanted to, but because they didn't know what else to do. You look into the water, but the reflection you see doesn't belong to you. It's a small ship leaning just slightly, no sails, no sound, just waiting, like always. The waters shift again, subtly at first. The air turns salty and sharp, as if something old and European has crept into the breeze. You're further from the Pacific now, further even from the icy silence of the Arctic. This part of the sea carries a softer current, but don't let that fool you, because the ship, floating towards you now, is quiet in a very different way. Elegant, Italian, and deeply, deeply out of place. This is the SV Bella Amica, a ghost ship that wasn't ancient, wasn't lost for decades, and wasn't even broken. In fact, when authorities found her, she still had dinner set on the table. Let's go back to August 2006. The Italian Coast Guard, doing routine patrols near the island of Sardinia, spotted something unusual on their radar. A sleek sailing yacht drifting aimlessly just offshore. No radio signals, no crew. Nothing about it suggested distress, but something was clearly wrong. They sent a boarding team. What they found baffled everyone. The ship, a medium-sized schooner, later dubbed Bella Amica Italian, for beautiful friend, was modern, clearly not an antique wreck. Her hull was in good condition. The decks were tidy, the cabin was clean, and there were no signs of panic. In the galley, dinner had been set. plates with partially eaten meals, cutlery arranged. The tablecloth hadn't even shifted. Bottled water and maps of North African seas lay nearby, as well as a pile of French books and clothing. The lights were still on. The sails were down. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of a storm. But there was no one aboard, no captain, no crew, no explanation. There was no registered vessel called Bellamica in any shipping database. No radio logs, no port departures, no immigration forms. She had simply appeared. People were captivated. For weeks, rumors swirled online and in the press. Some claimed it was a modern-day Mary Celeste. Others wondered if it had been a drug smuggling operation gone wrong. Still others leaned towards something more fantastical: alien abduction time, slip and experiment in disappearance. And then, just as the story reached peak strangeness, the truth broke through. Sort of. A man from Luxembourg came forward. He claimed the vessel belonged to him, that he had anchored the boat near Sardinia and simply gone ashore without proper documentation. He had gone home, apparently, and never reported the boat missing because he didn't realize it would drift. Was it legal? No. But was it mysterious? Well, kind of. Authorities were skeptical. For one, anchoring a ship in international waters and walking away from it isn't exactly common. And leaving dinner mid-meal with the lights on, with no notice to local authorities or marinas. It felt off. And here's where things remain murky, because while the man was never criminally charged and the boat was eventually reclaimed and registered, some elements of the story never quite lined up. For example, the vessel had no name on her hull when discovered. That's illegal in most maritime jurisdictions. Why sail incognito? And why leave maps of North Africa and a partially eaten dinner? Was the ship in use as a pleasure cruiser, a smuggling vessel, something in between? To this day, we don't know everything. And that's what's so strange about the Bellamica. She's one of the few ghost ships that entered the story alive and left it still unsunk. She wasn't battered by storms. She wasn't haunted by the faces of lost sailors. She was just empty and beautiful. The image of her sleek lines, wine-blown sails, that eerie dinner table glowing under interior lights left a lasting mark. Because it wasn't a ship from the 1800s. It wasn't lost for decades. It was, right now, modern, current, and still deeply wrong. That's what struck people most, that something so contemporary could feel so ancient. That a yacht you could have bought on Craigslist might carry the same chill as an old galleon run aground in fog. Ghost stories don't always require death. Sometimes it's the absence that does the haunting. You drift past now over the blue Mediterranean waters, where the Bellamica once bobbed so gently. The sea here is warm. The sun peeks through the haze, but the feeling remains. Not cold, not dangerous, just incomplete. You imagine boarding the vessel plates, still warm, glasses, sweating condensation, a linen napkin on the floor, a door swinging open and shut in the breeze, not creaking, not groaning, just moving, like someone left it ajar only moments ago. You listen. There's no voice, no sound, just that feeling you've walked into someone else's house uninvited, and they've only just stepped out. The wind picks up again, not in anger, but with purpose, like it's trying to show you something. Your ship turns slowly, following the push of the breeze, across a stretch of cold Atlantic where history never sleeps. And there, rising like a memory from the water, is a shape that doesn't belong to this century or the last one even. Broad, proud, and too far from home, the ship ahead is regal, even in ruin. This is the story of HMS Resolute, a British naval ship that vanished in ice was found drifting thousands of miles away, and eventually gave part of herself to history's most powerful desk. No, really? Let's rewind to 1852. Britain was still reeling from the mysterious disappearance of the Franklin expedition. Those twin ships, Erebus and Terror, lost in the Arctic ice with 129 men aboard. Desperate for answers, the Admiralty launched a massive rescue mission. Ships were sent in every direction into the most treacherous waters on Earth, hoping to find signs, wreckage, survivors, anything. HMS Resolute was one of those ships. Sturdy and ice-strengthened, she was tasked with scouring the Canadian Arctic for traces of Franklin's doomed voyage. The crew endured 2 brutal winters trapped in the ice. Scurvy, frostbite, starvation, they faced it all, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. By 1854, the ice had won. The men abandoned the Resolute, setting off across the frozen wilderness for rescue, leaving the ship behind to what they assumed would be a slow and frozen death. And yet, in September 1855, over a year later, and thousands of miles away, an American whaling ship spotted something strange drifting in the waters off the coast of Baffin Island. A large ship, empty, iced over, still upright. It was the Resolute. She had broken free of the Arctic grip on her own and begun drifting slowly across the sea, unmanned, unguided, just floating. For over 200 miles, the whalers towed her to port, where she quickly became a sensation. Newspapers called her the Ghost of the Arctic, a vessel returned from the dead. But this is where the story gets stranger. Rather than scrap the ship or claim her as salvage, the U.S. government did something no one expected. They repaired her, refitted her, polished her brass, and then gave her back to Britain. It was a gesture of goodwill, a symbol of diplomacy. At a time when the two nations had once been enemies and still eyed each other warily, the gift of the Resolute helped thaw frozen relations. The ship was returned to Queen Victoria, and the British people greeted her arrival like a homecoming. She would never sail into danger again. Instead, she was retired with honor, and years later, after she was finally decommissioned and dismantled, the timbers of her sturdy frame were used to build something unique, something symbolic. A desk, crafted from the oak of a ghost ship, presented to President Rutherford B. Hayes in 1880. The Resolute desk, if that name sounds familiar, it should. It still sits in the Oval Office. Presidents have signed treaties at it. Children have crawled beneath it. Television cameras have caught glimpses of it during some of history's most pivotal moments. And all of it, from Kennedy to Biden, traces back to that ship found adrift and silent in the ice-choked waters of the Arctic. There's something almost poetic about it. A ship built to search for the lost becomes a symbol of unity. A vessel left behind by explorers becomes the foundation for diplomacy. And yet the Resolute still feels haunted, not in the traditional sense, not by ghosts or phantom footsteps, but by the idea that something built for exploration, for movement, ended its journey in stillness. That part of her, the part still locked away in Arctic memory, never came home. Some say, on quiet nights in the White House, the desk creaks for no reason. Not loudly, just enough, like wood remembering waves. You pass over the waters now, where she once floated aimlessly, and the air feels strange, not dangerous, just respectful. You can almost see her. A great wooden ship sails tattered hull stained with ice, drifting with no crew, no direction, just the echo of men who had long since left her behind. And maybe that's the lesson she carried across the sea, that sometimes the things we abandon return stronger, that the sea doesn't always swallow. Sometimes it gives back, just long enough for us to understand what we lost. And if you ever visit the White House, look at that desk. Really look at it, Because beneath the pens and papers, beneath the smiling photo ops, and beneath the weight of government, there's something else. There's the Arctic. There's drift ice. There's a crew that never came home. And there's the ghost of a ship that carried them for a while through the silence. The clouds are heavier now, bloated with memory and storm light. Your ship rides low, almost cautious, as though it senses what's coming. And there up ahead is a vessel that once carried the weight of over 200 lives. All of them confident, all of them eager, none of them ready. This is the story of the SS Waratah, a ship so elegant, so promising, she was called the Titanic of the South before the real Titanic ever set sail. And like the Titanic, she vanished. But unlike the Titanic, the Waratah was never found. No wreck, no survivors, no explanation. Launched in 1908, the Waratah was a brand new passenger steamship built for the Blue Anchor Line. She was 465 feet long, had twin masts, elegant interiors, and was fitted with the latest Edwardian Comforts marble floors, mahogany trim, electric lights. She could carry 750 people and was meant to ferry passengers and cargo between Europe, South Africa, and Australia. She was more than a ship. She was a promise. Her maiden voyage went smoothly enough, but there were murmurs, whispers from the crew that she was top-heavy, that her upper decks were too ornate, too weighty, making her unstable in high seas. Still, she sailed on. In July 1909, she departed Durban, South Africa, bound for Cape Town, with 201 people on board, passengers, crew children, families, and several prominent businessmen. She never arrived. She was last seen by the Clan McIntyre, a cargo steamer heading in the opposite direction. The ships exchanged brief signals. The weather was overcast but manageable. And then the Waratah sailed into the distance, gone. When she failed to dock in Cape Town, the alarm was raised. A massive search followed warships, merchant vessels, even aircraft were dispatched. Not a single trace was found. No debris, no lifeboats, no oil slicks, nothing. She had vanished off one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. And that's when the questions began. Had she capsized, suffered a sudden mechanical failure, exploded? If she'd gone down slowly, surely someone would have launched a lifeboat, sent a flare. But no signals were received. No wreckage washed ashore. The sea had swallowed her clean. One of the first theories was that she had simply tipped. Her design was heavily scrutinized after the fact. Too many amenities on the upper decks. Too much luxury. Some test runs had noted that she rolled awkwardly in high winds. Add that to shifting cargo and rough seas, and it's possible she just keeled over in an instant. No warning, no time to react. Just one deep roll and down. Others believed she was caught in what sailors call a rogue wave, a monstrous wall of water that rises from nowhere, striking like a sledgehammer. It's rare, but not impossible. And a wave like that could have smashed her to pieces and dragged her under before anyone had time to think, let alone signal. But then, where's the wreck? It's not like she vanished in the middle of the Pacific. She was traveling along a well-charted corridor between Durban and Cape Town. If she sank, she did so in waters that should have given her up by now. And yet nothing. In 1977, nearly 70 years after her disappearance, a piece of wreckage was discovered near the South African coast. Excitement surged, but it wasn't hers. A different ship, a different story. The Waratah remained missing. To this day, marine archaeologists continue to scan the seafloor along her intended route. Still nothing. Some more outlandish theories have taken root, that she was sunk, deliberately perhaps carrying secret cargo, or targeted for political reasons. That someone didn't want her to reach Cape Town. But these are whispers, fever dreams, built in the absence of fact. Others claim she hit a submerged reef or uncharted rock, tearing open her hull beneath the waterline. A slow leak, a sudden plunge, but again, no wreck, no trail, no clue. One of the strangest parts of the story, a woman who had sailed on the Waratah earlier that year chose not to board her for the return trip. She said something felt off. The way the ship rolled, the way the crew behaved, a dream she couldn't shake. She took another ship. She lived. Everyone else aboard the Waratah was never seen again. You sail now through the waters where she vanished. It's calm, too calm. The sky hangs low, heavy with unspoken things. You picture the Waratah cutting through these waters, elegant, proud, and completely unaware that she was already history. You see the passengers laughing on deck, clinking glasses, leaning over the railing to point out distant shapes on the horizon. You hear the children running down the polished halls, chasing echoes. And then, you don't. Just one moment, and then nothing. The kind of nothing the ocean specializes in. You look down into the water, but it's blank, not even a ripple. Like the sea is still holding her, protecting her, or refusing to give her back. Because some vanishings are accidents, and others feel chosen. The Waratah never even left a ghost behind, and somehow, that's what makes her feel the most haunted of them all. Now, the wind shifts again, not cold this time, but dry. The air changes as if you've crossed into another story, another world. The stars above seem closer, sharper. You've left the polished halls of luxury liners and naval steel behind. You're entering the world of whispers and sailors' tales, and what lies ahead isn't just a ghost ship. It's a ship frozen in ice, a schooner said to have sailed from Europe to the Arctic crew, and returned over a decade later without a heartbeat aboard. This is the story of the Jenny, the ship trapped in ice for years, perfectly preserved, with its crew sitting at their posts, frozen in place like wax figures in a museum that no one meant to build. It begins as many sea myths do, with a supposed entry in a ship's log, a whaling vessel near the Drake Passage. The treacherous stretch between South America and Antarctica reportedly stumbled upon something extraordinary, a schooner locked in ice. A small, neat vessel, European in design, its sails tattered, but still partially rigged its flag, stiff from freezing. They boarded cautiously, expecting wreckage. What they found instead was silence and death, but not the chaotic, desperate kind. No blood, no violence, just stillness. Inside the captain's cabin, they discovered a man sitting at his desk, pen in hand, eyes open, but long since lifeless. His logbook sat before him, the ink frozen mid-word. Elsewhere, the crew were found in their bunks, curled up under blankets, their skin pale, their expressions calm, like they had simply fallen asleep in the cold and never woken up. Even the ship's dog was there, curled in a corner, perfectly preserved. The last logbook entry reportedly read, May 4th, 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive, which means the captain had stayed on board alone for weeks. Writing, waiting, freezing, and then nothing. The ship was identified as the Jenny said to have sailed from the Isle of Wight in 1822, bound for South America. Somehow, it had been blown far off course into Antarctic waters, where it became trapped in the ice and slowly sealed away from the world. The crew died one by one. The ship drifted with the ice for over a decade, until the sea gave it back. Or so the story goes. Because here's the thing, the Jenny may not have existed. There's no confirmed record of her ever being registered. No official logs. No government report. The story appeared first in an 1840 article in the German geographical magazine Globus, then reappeared over the years in scattered naval publications and sailors' retellings, but there's no consensus on where the original report came from. No official confirmation from the ship said to have found her. No name for the whaler, no captain's signature, just the story. And yet it lingers, more than most, because something about it feels true. We know that ice can preserve the dead perfectly. The Franklin expedition sailors, found decades later, still had facial hair, still wore uniforms, still gripped their utensils. And we know that ships have been trapped in polar pack ice and released years later. So the Jenny isn't impossible, just unconfirmed. And maybe that's what makes her perfect. She exists in that strange space between maritime history and legend. The kind of tale told by candlelight. Not to frighten, but to remind that the sea doesn't have to sink you to keep you. Sometimes it just waits, preserves, watches. There's even a poem written by Agnes Eliza Fraser, dated 1862, titled simply, The Ship Jenny. It tells of the frozen schooner and her lost crew found adrift off the Drake Passage, their deaths mourned by the waves. A kind of elegy to a ship that may have never lived and may never die. You pass through that same southern sea now. The wind is sharper here, more personal. You look out across the black water and imagine it white sails, shredded hull, frosted a ghost of a ship, not just haunted, but embalmed, a floating mausoleum. You picture the captain at his desk, the ink still wet when the blood stopped moving, his eyes staring into nothing, perhaps watching the ice drift past the porthole for months, years. And maybe, just maybe, you believe it. Because in this place, belief and water are the same thing. Slippery, endless, capable of pulling you under. So you lean back, wrap your coat tighter, and drift silently through the waters, where a ship once returned after being forgotten. Not sunk, not wrecked, just preserved. A reminder that the sea remembers everything, even the stories we're not sure are real. The sea turns steel gray beneath you, flat, cold, and uninviting. It's the kind of water that doesn't ripple, doesn't dance. It just waits. Heavy with old stories, heavy with the weight of those who never returned. And now, coming into view, you see a vessel too large to vanish, and yet it did. A ship that once carried hundreds across the icy North Atlantic, proud and fast. This is the SS Arctic, a luxury liner that should have been remembered for its speed and elegance, but it's remembered instead for how it disappeared, and how almost everyone aboard died except the crew. Let's go back to 1854. In the mid-19th century, steamships were revolutionizing transatlantic travel. The SS Arctic was one of the crown jewels of the Collins Line, an American shipping company determined to compete with Britain's Cunard Line. She was large for her time, nearly 300 feet long, with elegant accommodations, state-of-the-art paddle wheels, and powerful engines. She could carry hundreds of passengers in style, but speed and style came at a cost. On September 27th, 1854, the Arctic left Liverpool, England, bound for New York. On board were about 400 people, passengers and crew, including families, businessmen, and even the wife and children of the ship's owner, E.K. Collins. It was supposed to be a routine voyage, but on the fifth day at sea, heavy fog rolled in off the coast of Newfoundland. The Arctic was still pushing at top speed. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, and that's when it happened. Out of the fog emerged the Vesta, a smaller French iron-hulled steamer. The Arctic's wooden hull wasn't designed to handle such a collision. The Vesta's iron bow tore a gash in the Arctic's side just below the waterline. At first, the damage didn't seem catastrophic. Passengers remained calm, but water began rushing into the ship faster than the pumps could handle. The hull filled quickly, and panic began to spread. Lifeboats were launched, but there were only 6, enough to carry fewer than 200 people. There were more than 400 on board. And then came the worst part. The crew, many of them untrained in crisis, began scrambling for the lifeboats. Women and children were pushed aside. Orders were ignored. Some lifeboats were launched half empty, occupied mostly by male crew members. By the time the Arctic finally sank around 4 hours after the collision, hundreds were still on board. Passengers, families, wives, clutching infants. The owner's wife and children perished. Most of the women and children died. Of the estimated 400 people on board, fewer than 90 survived, and almost all of them were crew. In the aftermath, there was national outrage. Newspapers in America and Europe ran furious editorials. How people asked, could the crew of a great ship save themselves while the passengers drowned? In an age where the idea of women and children first was gaining moral weight, the Arctic disaster felt like a betrayal, not just of good seamanship, but of decency. The Collins Line tried to recover, but the scandal was too great. Trust was broken. The company eventually collapsed, and the SS Arctic faded into the dark catalog of ocean tragedies. But she didn't fade completely, because she taught the world something ugly. She showed us that courage isn't guaranteed at sea, that even on the most elegant ships in the most organized nations, when the cold water starts rising, panic can outweigh protocol. The Arctic wasn't a ghost ship in the traditional sense. She didn't drift alone. She didn't reappear later. But her story has haunted the Atlantic ever since. And somewhere deep beneath these gray waters, her bones still rest. Wooden planks, rusted metal-torn velvet seats scattered across the ocean floor. You pass over them now, and it's quiet. You imagine the silence before the scream, the moment when the ship tipped slightly to one side and people knew. The moment when sailors began to argue, when passengers clutched their loved ones a little tighter. You picture a lifeboat lowering too fast, slapping the waves with a jolt. You hear a captain shouting orders into a wind that doesn't listen. And then, the groan of wood, the crack, the plunge. It's said that after the Arctic went down, her name was avoided in shipping circles for years. She became a lesson spoken in low voices. Don't run at full speed in fog. Don't build wooden ships for an iron world. Don't forget who you're supposed to save. And yet, even now, many don't remember her name. She predates the Titanic by over half a century, but her death was no less shocking, no less tragic, just quieter, forgotten by time but not by the sea, because the ocean keeps everything, especially the stories we don't want to hear. The water grows darker now, tinged with deep green and gray. You're heading into a different kind of silence, the kind that comes not from ancient tragedy or forgotten ghosts, but from something closer, something modern, tangible, real, because this next story didn't unfold in some far-off sea under sails and starlight. It happened right here on the Great Lakes. And even now, divers still visit the wreck. They still whisper its name when the weather turns rough. This is the story of the SS Kamloops, a freighter that vanished into a snowstorm and reappeared decades later, hauntingly well preserved. And so was part of her crew. Let's step back to December 1927. The Kamloops was a steel-hulled lake freighter part of the Canada Steamship Line's fleet. She was 250 feet long and specialized in hauling package freight cargo like paper machinery, tar shoes, and canned goods around the Great Lakes. In late November of that year, she left Montreal on a final run before the lakes froze over for winter. Her destination was Fort William, now Thunder Bay, on the northern tip of Lake Superior. It was a tight schedule. The shipping season was closing and winter storms were already sweeping in. But the Kamloops pushed on. She made her last known sighting on December 5th near Ile Royale, an isolated island cluster in the middle of the lake, and then she vanished. No distress call, no debris, no lifeboats. For months, nothing. Winter locked the lake in ice. By spring, searchers had little hope, but they tried anyway. They found nothing. The Kamloops had disappeared, leaving families to wait without answers. Until 50 years later, in 1977, recreational divers exploring the waters near Ile Royale stumbled upon a wreck. It was intact. It was deep. And it was the Kamloops. She had sunk in one of the most remote and frigid parts of Lake Superior, a place so cold and oxygen-deprived that even time seems to slow. The wreck sat upright on the lake bed, her hull remarkably preserved. Inside the cargo was still neatly stacked boxes of candy bars, leather goods, even jars of preserved food that hadn't spoiled after half a century underwater. But the cold preserved more than supplies. In the engine room, divers discovered the remains of a crew member, perfectly preserved. So well preserved, in fact, that his skin was still intact, his uniform still worn, his eyes still in place. They call him the Frozen Man. He floats inside the engine room, gently bobbing with the currents, as if waiting for his shift to start. The water has mummified him. The cold keeps him suspended in time, and because of the conditions, removing the body could destroy it. So, he remains there, still working the ship that never made it home. His presence turned the Kamloops from an ordinary wreck into something else, a place of eerie stillness, a reminder that the Great Lakes don't just take, they keep. Historians believe the ship likely struck submerged rocks or simply became overwhelmed by shifting ice during a surprise storm. Lake Superior is infamous for such tricks. One minute it's calm, the next it's claws. Many have tried to piece together the crew's final moments. Did they realize they were sinking? Did they try to abandon ship? Or did they simply vanish under the ice with barely a moment to react? There are no clear answers, only that Frozen Man, floating, watching, preserved in the cold and pressure of the lake's deepest reach. Divers today approach the wreck with reverence, not fear, but a kind of respectful awe. The Kamloops has become part of Ile Royale National Park, and diving there requires special permits. But those who've gone down say the same thing. She doesn't feel like a wreck. She feels like a ship that never stopped sailing. Her cargo is still there. Her crew, at least in part, still watches. And the cold keeps it all in place. You pass over the waters near Ile Royale now, and even from above you can feel it. Stillness, a deep cold quiet that no sun ever fully reaches. You imagine the Kamloops beneath you bow first in the silt, her smokestack reaching into the darkness, her windows staring upward. Waiting, she sank in the middle of the lake. But her story still ripples through the shores. Locals tell it in bars on winter nights. Fishermen nod quietly when her name comes up. And divers speak of her not like a relic, but like a memory. Still here, still whole, still watching. The lake gives way once more to the open sea, and with it, a different rhythm returns. The waves are broader now, slower, but heavier, like something breathing just beneath the surface. You move through waters not unfamiliar with loss. These are the same Atlantic routes where countless ships have sailed and many have vanished, but few disappeared as completely and as hauntingly as the MV Derbyshire. This wasn't a schooner from the 1800s or a masted frigate from the Age of Sail. The Derbyshire was modern, massive, steel and engines and satellite radios, and yet When she went down, she left almost nothing behind. Let's go back to September 9th, 1980. The MV Derbyshire was a 964-foot-long bulk carrier, one of the largest ships ever built in Britain at the time. She had only been in service for 4 years. Designed to carry huge quantities of cargo across oceans, she was built like a fortress, strong, reliable, and loaded with redundancies. She was on a run from Canada to Japan, hauling 157,000 tons of iron ore concentrate. On board were 44 people, 42 crew members, and 2 accompanying wives. She sailed into the Pacific, bound for Kawasaki, and disappeared in the South China Sea during Typhoon Orchid. Just gone. There was no distress call, no mayday, no signal. When she failed to arrive, a massive international search effort was launched. They found nothing. No lifeboats, no floating cargo, not even a life jacket. The only thing ever recovered was a single empty lifeboat discovered adrift weeks later by chance. For a time, speculation ran wild. Had she been struck by another vessel? Sabotaged? Was it a rogue wave? A structural flaw? The families of the crew pushed for answers. For years, they were met with resistance. Initial reports blamed human error, suggesting the crew mishandled the typhoon. But the families refused to accept that. They insisted the ship had failed, not the sailors. They were right. In 1994, 14 years after the ship's disappearance, a detailed investigation and underwater survey finally located the wreck. She had sunk in 4 kilometers of water, and the evidence was clear. She had broken apart in the storm, fatally, violently. The cause: structural failure in the forward section of the ship. The typhoon's massive waves had breached the air vents and hatch covers on the bow. Water rushed in. Not all at once, but in a series of failures. Once enough pressure built up, the entire front of the ship essentially snapped off and dragged the rest of the vessel under. The crew never stood a chance. It happened too quickly. The ship went down in under 2 minutes. The investigation led to major safety overhauls in maritime design, stronger hatches, improved vent systems, more rigorous inspections. The Derbyshire's legacy, however tragic, saved lives in the decades that followed. But for the families of those lost, no reform could undo the loss. There's a photo of the crew taken days before they departed. It shows them smiling, relaxed. Young men, seasoned sailors, standing proudly on the deck of a vessel they believed would carry them across the world and home again. It didn't. The wreck sits silently at the bottom of the Philippine Sea. The bow is nearly unrecognizable, mangled and collapsed. The stern lies far away, scattered with debris. What makes the story so unsettling isn't just how the Derbyshire vanished, it's how long it took to find her. In an era of satellites and sonar radar and black boxes, it still took over a decade and persistent pressure from grieving families to uncover the truth. It reminds us that even the modern sea, even the one mapped and charted and GPS tagged, is still capable of swallowing giants completely. You pass now above those waters, and the sea is calm, tyrannically calm. It rolls beneath you like nothing ever happened, as if 44 people weren't lost here, as if a ship the size of a skyscraper didn't tear in half and vanish in seconds. You look out and picture it. The wind howling, the deck slick with rain, the front hatches groaning. A single crash, a roar of water, and silence. The Derbyshire's name is still spoken in merchant sailor circles, not just as a ghost, but as a warning that no ship, no matter how large or modern, is beyond the reach of failure, that the sea doesn't care about engineering or statistics or reputation, only about pressure and time, and whether your steel can take it. You look down again, and for a moment, you imagine the ship not as a wreck, but whole, gliding beneath you through the deep. Crew at the rails, engines humming. Then you blink, and the water closes over it again, as if it was never there. But you know better, because the sea may not show you everything, but it never forgets. There's a fatigue in the air now, a quiet exhaustion. You've sailed across centuries of disappearances, felt the hush of sunken decks drifted over shadows, too old to name. But the sea still isn't done. One last shape rises on the horizon, sleek, sharp, industrial. A ship that vanished not in some forgotten age of sail, but in the glare of modern headlines. This is the story of the SS President, a steam-powered ocean liner that vanished without a trace in 1841. And despite her fame, her size, and the storm she likely sailed into, no one has ever found her. Let's start with the ship herself. The SS President was a marvel of her time, over 270 feet long, with 3 masts and a massive steam engine. She was part of the British and American Steam Navigation Company, and at the time of her maiden voyage in 1840, she was the largest passenger ship in the world. Designed to dominate transatlantic travel, the President was luxurious, fast, and famous, but she had problems. Too big for her engine, too top-heavy, and worst of all, she handled poorly in rough seas. On earlier voyages, passengers complained of her sluggish turning and how easily she wallowed in large swells. Still, she was a marvel. So when she departed New York on March 11, 1841, bound for Liverpool, there was every expectation she would complete the journey. There were 136 people on board, crew, passengers, and several well-known figures of the day, including inventor and diplomat Richard Rush. The weather at departure was poor. A storm was already building in the Atlantic, but the President steamed ahead. She was never seen again. No distress signal, no floating debris, no survivors, just gone. For weeks, British and American ports waited for her arrival. Newspapers speculated. Other ships watched the horizon. Rumors swirled. Had she limped into an isolated harbor? Had she struck an iceberg? Had she been captured by pirates? But eventually, even the speculation went quiet. The President had vanished completely. At the time, the ship's disappearance was one of the most significant maritime disasters in history, not just because of the lives lost, but because of what she represented. This wasn't a fishing boat or a merchant schooner. This was the future. Steam power, iron-reinforced hulls, global prestige, and she still disappeared just like all the rest. A few small items, planks and spars, were reported washing ashore months later on the Irish coast, but none were definitively tied to the President. The ocean had erased her too cleanly. Later inquiries criticized the ship's design. Her size and shape made her prone to instability. The extra deck, added to enhance passenger luxury, had raised her center of gravity dangerously high. She was described as lethargic, in open water, slow to turn, poor at keeping a straight course. And then there was her power. Despite her bulk, the President had only a single paddle wheel engine. Most ships her size had two. If that engine failed or struggled during heavy seas, she would have been nearly impossible to control. So the most likely explanation: she sailed straight into a storm, her engine failed, she turned broadside into the waves, and she rolled, sank fast. But again, where was the wreck? Her route from New York to Liverpool was well known, traveled frequently. And while the Atlantic is vast, a ship that large with that many passengers should have left something behind. A lifeboat, a flare, a scrap of iron, but nothing came. And so, the President joined the long list of names that the sea erased. Over time, the mystery faded. Other tragedies came. larger ones. The Titanic, the Lusitania, the Derbyshire, each one stealing the headlines, each one newer, more tragic, more immediate. But the President remains one of the earliest large-scale vanishings of the modern age, and some still whisper about her, that she was the first warning, that she showed us even then what the sea was capable of, not just swallowing ships, but making them disappear entirely. Her name resurfaces every few years, usually when another vessel goes missing, or when sonar scanners pass over an unknown wreck in the Atlantic. But nothing has ever been confirmed. Even now, nearly 2 centuries later, she's still out there somewhere beneath the waves or crushed into the seafloor, her iron hull curled like a sleeping beast. You pass over that same sea now. The water is vast, indifferent, endless. The horizon looks the same as it did in 1841. And somewhere beneath all this silence, 136 voices remain unanswered. You imagine her still steaming into the storm fog, pressing against the glass, passengers clinging to railings, crew shouting over the roar of wind, a single wave too high, a single engine too weak, and then gone. No lights, no cries, just water, and still nothing has been found. No ghost ship rising from the mist, no journal in a bottle, no final message. And that somehow makes it worse, because a disappearance that thorough feels like something else entirely, not just a wreck, but a vanishing, the kind the sea specializes in. And you sailing over it now understand why some sailors never trust calm waters, because they're often just a mask, and beneath them lies the President. There's a hush now, not from wind or water, but from something deeper. A sense that you're entering a place where time doesn't matter, where stories freeze, then flicker to life again with each telling. Ahead you see no ship on the surface, but something darker moves beneath you, more suggestion than shape, an echo that swims. This is the story of the Octavius, the legendary ghost ship found adrift, locked in Arctic ice with her crew frozen at their posts, and the captain still at his desk, pen in hand. It's one of the oldest, eeriest stories the sea has ever coughed up. A tale so strange, so still, it barely feels like it happened at all, and yet it refuses to be forgotten. Let's begin in 1775. A whaling vessel off the coast of Greenland, the Herald, spots something unusual bobbing in the distance. A large, unmoving ship, wooden-masted, silent. The crew approaches. There are no signs of life. The ship isn't listing. She's upright. Her sails are torn and stiff. Her hull is iced over. They board her carefully. Inside, everything is still. In the galley, food sits untouched. In the crew's quarters, men lie in bunks, fully clothed, unmoving, frozen solid. They make their way to the captain's cabin, and there, at the desk, sits the captain himself, dead, but upright. His logbook is open in front of him, his pen still in hand. His eyes, they say, are open too. The ink is frozen, the last entry dated 1762, 13 years earlier, which means the Octavius, if that truly was her name, had been trapped in Arctic ice for over a decade, drifting, preserved, watching. The crew of the Herald, understandably shaken, took only the logbook and fled. The rest of the ship and its silent passengers were left to drift back into the fog and the ice, never seen again. Now let's be clear, there are no official maritime records for a vessel named Octavius. No registry, no documented voyage to match. But the story has lived on, first in sailors' bars, then in pamphlets, then in 19th century ghost ship anthologies, and always with the same details. A ship locked in ice, a crew frozen where they stood, a captain upright, pen in hand, mid-log. What makes the tale compelling isn't just its horror, it's its stillness. No violence, no storm, just a slow freeze, a drifting death, and a ship that became a coffin. Some say the Octavius was attempting the Northwest Passage, trying to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Arctic, a nearly suicidal route in the 1700s. If true, that would explain her position. And her fate? Others say she was blown north unexpectedly by a storm trapped in pack ice before the crew had a chance to escape. But the legend says more than facts ever could, because the image of a captain still doing his duty, still logging the ship's position, even as frost crept across the cabin, is something that chills the blood. It speaks to the futility of control in the face of nature, of how discipline and structure mean nothing when the cold decides. It turns men into statues. It turns ships into shrines. Some versions of the tale say the Octavius's logbook described the death of the crew in slow detail, one by one, day by day, as rations ran out and temperatures dropped. Others claim the log stopped suddenly, just a date, then silence. No last words, just a pen still gripped by frozen fingers. The story has no confirmed ending. We don't know if the Herald truly existed, or if the logbook ever made it home. But that's how sea legends work. They don't need proof, they need presence. And the Octavius has it in abundance. She floats in the back of every sailor's mind who's seen ice gathering on the rigging, every explorer who's heard wood crack like a scream in Arctic silence. You pass now through the northern sea lanes far above Canada, where summer is more concept than season. The water is glass, the sky is pale, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the creak of wooden masts under pressure, the flap of frozen canvas, the slow exhale of something that no longer breathes. You imagine boarding her, not a shipwreck, but a museum. Plates on the table, chairs tipped just slightly, a deckhand forever paused in the act of tying rope, a ship made of people who never left their posts. They didn't abandon the ship abandoned time and drifted on, still intact, still upright, still sailing. Maybe she's still out there, hidden by shifting ice sheets, protected by silence. Or maybe she sank, slowly, quietly, as if the ocean decided even legends must sleep. But when the wind bites colder than expected, when the compass needle shivers, when a sliver of wooden bow breaks through the fog, you'll wonder, is that her? Is that the Octavius? Still riding, still waiting, still here. The sky is darker now, not from storm, but from weight. Each wave feels heavier, more purposeful, like the ocean is pulling you towards something it buried not out of malice, but memory. And ahead, you see them not one ship, but many. Shapes tangled beneath the water, resting in rows like soldiers in formation. No movement, no light. This is not a ghost ship. This is a ghost fleet. Welcome to the sunken graveyard, known as the Ghost Fleet of Truk Lagoon. And if ever there was a place where history sleeps with one eye open, it's here. Let's begin in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in a remote corner of Micronesia. Today, it's called Truk Lagoon, part of the Federated States of Micronesia. But during World War II, it was known by another name, Truk Lagoon. And it was the crown jewel of Japan's Pacific naval defense, a massive fortified harbor with airstrip supply depots and a sprawling fleet of warships, submarines, cargo vessels, and tankers. Hundreds of them. It was Japan's answer to Pearl Harbor, and in February 1944, America came knocking. They called it Operation Hailstone. In a coordinated strike of stunning scale, U.S. forces launched an assault on Truk Lagoon that would last 3 days, February 17th to 18, using aircraft carriers, submarines, bombers, and destroyers. The goal: destroy Japan's Pacific Fleet before it could regroup. And they succeeded, with brutal efficiency. Over 40 ships were sunk. More than 250 aircraft were destroyed. Thousands of Japanese servicemen died, many trapped aboard sinking vessels, some going down, with their hands still on the controls. The sea turned black with oil and red with blood, and then it went still. When the fighting stopped, the ships remained at the bottom of the lagoon, preserved, untouched for decades. In the years that followed, divers began to explore. What they found was staggering. Tankers resting upright on the seabed, warships with torpedoes still loaded, cargo vessels with crates of bullets, rifles, even motorcycles in their holds, gas masks lying on mess hall tables, medical kits unopened, personal belongings, comb shoes, glasses still tucked into drawers. In the engine rooms, gauges remained frozen at their last reading. In some bodies, still rested in place skeletons in tattered uniforms. The salt water had slowed decay, and the lagoon's stillness had preserved it all. Truk Lagoon became the largest underwater military cemetery in the world, and possibly the most haunted. Divers today report a hush unlike anywhere else, not just quiet, but something deeper, a feeling of presence, not hostility, not peace, just watching. Some say they've seen figures through the portholes. Others have heard metallic taps echo from inside the wrecks. Even the fish swim carefully here, and no one laughs too loudly. Because this is not just a dive site, it's a graveyard. The ships of Truk Lagoon are not random victims of a storm. They were sunk by design, with purpose, with war, and that makes their stillness all the more chilling. Among the most famous is the Fujikawa Maru, a cargo ship that now lies in 100 feet of water. Her deck guns still point skyward. Inside, fighter plane parts sit untouched, along with porcelain dishes and medical gear. Another wreck, the Shinkoku Maru, has become a surreal reef. Coral now grows over her hull, and sharks patrol her silent corridors. The San Francisco Maru, dubbed the $1 Million Wreck, contains tanks, trucks, mines, and hundreds of bombs still nestled in her cargo bays. All of it silent, all of it deadly. To this day, the wrecks are slowly deteriorating. Metal gives way to rust, wood softens, but still, they remain windows into a moment that ended in fire and fell into silence. For the people of Truk, the lagoon is sacred. It holds sorrow and history in equal measure. Fishermen still work the waters above. Children swim near shore, but the wrecks are left undisturbed. Because everyone here knows the sea remembers, and they know what waits just beneath their feet. You pass over the lagoon now. The water is impossibly clear. You can see straight down, a row of masts, the curve of a bow, a name in Japanese characters slowly being eaten by coral. You imagine the sky lit with tracer fire bombers screaming down the ships below, scrambling to fight back men, shouting in Japanese as the first explosions rip through the decks. And then silence. Decades of it. A silence broken only by bubbles and breath as divers slip through doorways that were once alive with motion. Some call this place the Pearl Harbor of the Japanese. But it's more than that. It's what happens when an entire fleet is buried where it stood. A museum you must swim through. A battlefield made of steel and coral. And even now, nearly 80 years later, it is not finished telling its story. You drift above it, your own ship temporarily the only one above the surface, and beneath you, row after row of sunken giants still lined up in ranks, still holding their breath, still keeping watch. The sea is so clear here that for a moment it feels like falling, like you're about to slip downward through time, but the surface holds, the silence continues, and the ghost fleet waits, not for revenge, not for rescue, just to be remembered. It's quiet again, but this time it feels final. Like the sea is catching its breath after holding it for so long. You've drifted through legends and wreckage, through frost and steel. And now, just as you think there's nothing left to tell, the ocean reaches out one last time and gives you a submarine, silent, sleek, missing for decades. This is the story of the USS Scorpion, a modern American nuclear submarine that vanished in 1968 during the Cold War and took 99 souls to the bottom of the Atlantic. And we still don't know exactly why. Let's start with what we do know. The USS Scorpion, SSN 589, was a skipjack-class nuclear submarine, one of the fastest and most advanced in the U.S. Navy fleet at the time. Built in the late 1950s and launched in 1960, she was a sleek machine of the Cold War 252 feet, long-powered by a nuclear reactor, armed with torpedoes, and capable of reaching depths the public still doesn't know the full extent of. In May of 1968, the Scorpion was returning home from a mission near the Mediterranean. She had completed surveillance tasks, including keeping an eye on Soviet fleet movements. She sent a final message on May 21st, saying she was about 400 miles southwest of the Azores and heading back to Norfolk, Virginia. She never arrived. No distress call, no sonar alert, no warning. She simply vanished. And what happened next is where the mystery thickens. The U.S. Navy, aware of Cold War tensions and the sensitivity of nuclear vessels, didn't immediately announce the loss. It quietly launched a massive search operation under the code name Operation Sand Dollar. For months, nothing. Finally, in late October, 5 months after the Scorpion went missing, a deep-sea search team, using special sonar, picked up echoes of a wreck on the seafloor. It was the Scorpion. She lay at a depth of over 9,800 feet, nearly 2 miles down, broken into several large pieces. The bow was crushed. The sail had collapsed. The hull was twisted like a crushed tin can, and around her, scattered across the ocean floor, were the remnants of the ship's systems equipment and the silence of 99 lost sailors. But the cause, still debated. Official Navy reports say the exact reason for the sinking is undetermined. Some point to a malfunctioning torpedo, a possibility that one of the ship's own weapons misfired and detonated internally. Others suggest a mechanical failure, a jammed trash disposal unit, a battery explosion, a leak in the torpedo room. All could have led to catastrophic flooding in seconds. But there's a darker possibility that the Scorpion was sunk deliberately, perhaps in a Cold War skirmish that neither side wanted to admit. At the time, the Soviets had been shadowing U.S. submarines more aggressively than ever. There was speculation, never confirmed, that the Scorpion was struck by a Soviet submarine or depth charge, and that the entire incident was buried to prevent escalation. The Cold War wasn't just fought with missiles, it was fought with silence. Some families of the Scorpion crew believed the truth was hidden, that the U.S. Navy knows more than it ever released. After all, in 1968, 4 submarines from 4 different countries were lost in the span of a few months. An eerie coincidence. The Israeli INS Dakar, the French Minerve, the Soviet K-129, and the American USS Scorpion, 4 submarines, 4 disappearances, 1 year. It feels like something more than coincidence, but the answers are still locked away under government seal, under ocean pressure, and under thousands of feet of cold black water. What's especially haunting is that the Scorpion wasn't even scheduled to return home when she did. She had been ordered back early. Why? We still don't know. Maybe she saw something. Maybe she was in danger. Maybe someone knew, and no one told. Today, the wreck of the Scorpion still lies on the seabed, its nuclear reactor intact, its torpedoes unrecovered, its secrets unspoken. The Navy monitors the site regularly for radiation leaks, but they never brought the wreck up. They never released a full, uncensored report. They never fully explained, and maybe they never will. You sail above the site now, though no buoy marks the spot. The sea here is deep beyond understanding. It absorbs sound. It swallows pressure. It erases evidence. You imagine the Scorpion down there, twisted silent, her nameplate coated in silt. A steel coffin filled with names and duty and unfinished letters. And above her, the endless Atlantic, indifferent, motionless, waiting. Some say you can still hear her on sonar, faint taps, strange echoes. Probably nothing. Probably the sea remembering. You look down, and for a heartbeat, you see her. Not wrecked, not broken, but whole. Rising slowly through the water, silent as breath gliding past like she's still on patrol. Then you blink, and it's gone. Only the water remains, and the quiet hum of secrets that still haven't surfaced. So now the lights are low. The sea has gone still. And all those ships, the burning ones, the frozen ones, the ones torn apart by pressure or forgotten entirely, they settle in your mind like silt in deep water. You've drifted through centuries tonight, through steam and sail steel and wood. You followed the Mary Celeste as she floated without a soul, watched the Octavius remain frozen in time, and listened for echoes near the silent grave of the Scorpion. You've seen ships that never should have floated disappear in seconds, and ships that should have sunk like the Bay Chimo refused to let go. Some were wartime wrecks, others simple cargo runs. Some were full of passengers with hopes and letters and winter coats, never knowing their names would one day be spoken like questions. A few, like the Palatine, never truly left at all, still flickering in the night, and through it all, one truth kept rising. The ocean doesn't care how modern your ship is, how rich your passengers are, or how carefully you plan. The sea is ancient, patient, and profoundly quiet. It erases tracks, muffles cries, and swallows signals. It keeps its stories close, but not forever, because you heard them tonight, not through sonar or searchlights, but through a whisper, a tilt of the wind, the echo of footsteps across a wooden deck that shouldn't be there. So now, as you turn off the last light and settle in, just remember, if you hear a creak in the night or the faint clang of metal far out past the breakers, it's probably nothing, just the sea dreaming. And it dreams in shipwrecks,